Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Cheater. I still remember the day I married Carla. It was around 12 years ago. She was this sweet, delicate, and petite girl who captured my heart from the very first moment I laid my eyes on her. At that time, she was dating a guy, but I couldn't help but fall in love with her. I started to make advances toward her, hoping that she would notice me and be attracted to me. To my surprise, she responded to my advances, and I thought maybe I had won her over, and she had fallen in love with me too. Despite being in a relationship, she started meeting me secretly, and we started hanging out more and more. Soon after, she broke up with her boyfriend and got together with me. Looking back, I should have known that it was the first red flag in our relationship, but my love for her so blinded me that I never noticed. After dating Carla for a couple of months, I decided to propose to her, and she happily accepted. Carla had a penchant for spending money, but it never bothered me since I had a good income. To keep her happy, I began working even harder than before. I was completely devoted to her and never once considered the possibility of her being unfaithful to me. I poured my heart and soul into the relationship, believing that Carla felt the same way. However, I was unaware that I should have been more cautious of her actions. Little did I know that my trust in her would soon be shattered. For the past 6 months, I've observed my wife's shopping behavior. She seemed to have shifted from her usual in-store shopping to ordering items online for home delivery. Initially, I didn't pay much attention to what she ordered or how much she spent. However, I started noticing that the house was filling up with unnecessary items that she had ordered online. I began to feel that she had become one of those people who could not resist buying things online. I tried to discuss my concerns with her, but she always came up with excuses. Another thing I noticed was that a delivery guy would frequently visit our home. I found this odd and sometimes caught him leaving our house when I returned home. The frequency of this man's visits increased over time, and I began to suspect that something was not right. I shared my concerns with my best friend, who suggested I install hidden cameras around the house to monitor the situation. That day, as I sat inside and watched my wife through the hidden camera, I noticed her opening the door for the same delivery guy. He handed her a package, and as she turned to put it on the table, he grabbed her by the waist and pulled her closer. I felt enraged to see this, but my heart shattered into a million pieces when I saw her passionately kissing him and leading him to our bedroom. I immediately stood up and practically ran to the parking before taking out my car and rushing home, while constantly hoping that she would send him away. My heart throbbed at the thought of my wife with another man doing the stuff she was supposed to only do with me. I accelerated my car to get to my home as quickly as possible to stop what was happening inside. However, the more I recalled the two of them kissing, the angrier I became. I didn't want to imagine what else they might have been doing in my bedroom, and the mere thought felt like 1,000 stabbing knives to my heart. Upon arrival, I ran up the stairs to my apartment instead of taking the elevator to arrive faster. The moment I stepped into my house, a sense of unease tugged at the corners of my mind. I moved quickly and quietly, and my footsteps were muffled by the plush carpeting beneath my feet. My heart was pounding in my chest as I approached my bedroom door, my hand shaking as I reached for the doorknob. When I pushed the door open, the scene that unfolded before me was like a knife to my heart. My wife was there, entwined with the delivery guy, their bodies pressed together in an intimate embrace. The sight was like a physical blow, and I felt as though the air had been knocked out of my lungs. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, unable to move or speak as the tears streamed down my face. With a sense of defeat and losing my mind, I grabbed the man, started beating the shit out of him. I didn't care what it was that I grabbed. I hit him with whatever I could find. Carla screamed for me to stop and tried to calm me down, but it only made me enraged as I slapped her so hard she let out an ear-piercing scream while falling on the floor. I don't know how long I kept beating the guy, but I was pulled back to my senses by the sound of the doorbell and the voice of the police asking to open the door. Turning toward trembling Carla, I whispered in her ears that she would keep her mouth shut or I would kill her before we went to open the door. I knew the police were suspicious of me and that I would be the one going to jail while she would get away with what she did to me. So I texted my best friend Adam, asking for help and to give her instructions on what he needed to do once I was in prison. Just as I predicted, I was locked up, and a few days later, I was charged with murder after the delivery guy died in the hospital. When the police asked me if I knew anything regarding Carla's disappearance, I denied it, while knowing all too well that Adam had probably done his work.
Revenge. I would be back after paying back those who did this to you. I heard Antonio's distant voice and his warm lips touching my forehead before I drifted into the dream of my past. 7 years ago. I absent-mindedly listened to Haley and Scarlett's plan to escape foster care. It was an endless cycle in this place. Children got tired of mistreatment and neglect, and they would often choose this step only to be dragged back here. I had lost all hopes of escaping this hell before turning 18, so I had to endure this for a few more months. These two girls were 14 and 16, and even after watching how Jack was punished for running away, they were still foolish enough to believe their plan would be successful. "Oh, whatever. I'm off to the park," I muttered under my breath before getting up. A $10 bill was in my back pocket, which I earned through chores. It was rare for them to give the kids money, but after battering me like flour for bread, one of the caretakers took pity on me and gave me some money for the chores. Limping from the injury I received to my ankle, I walked past the Ojos Locos bar when I noticed a girl around my age or a few months older working as a server. Maybe I could get a job here after I get out of foster care a few months later. It wasn't like I could get a real job without proper education. With a loud growl, my stomach announced its hunger, and I scanned the area to see if I could buy something around here. I walked to the street food vendor at the end of the road and brought a corn dog for myself. While eating it, I walked into the local park and observed children playing with their parents or siblings. I stopped wondering about the reason why my parents chose to abandon me after the age of 10. It only made me bitter whenever I watched others receiving love and care while I only got beaten up and mistreated. After losing my will to walk anymore, I turned around toward my hell. Miss Agatha, or Mother Agatha for other kids, noticed me walking in and asked where I was or if I had completed the work she had assigned me. I responded by nodding my head, and I don't know what ticked her off about me when she gritted her teeth and asked to see me in her office. My body started to quiver at the thought of what she would do to me, but I had no choice but to follow her with trembling legs. It was better that not many kids knew what went on behind that closed door. The day Samantha turned 18, I stood outside the Ojos Locos, wondering how to apply for a job here when the guard asked me if I wanted to go in. I shook my head, not knowing what to do, and walked back. It was the day I would finally be kicked out since I was of legal age to fend for myself now. And if I couldn't get a job and a place to sleep by evening, I would be spending the night on the street. I noticed a server girl smoking in a nearby alley, and I decided to ask her about the hiring process. She scanned me from head to toe and asked, "Are you sure you want to work here, doll? This place is not for everyone." I couldn't think of a reply, but I was sure it would be better than what I suffered all these years. Before I could reply, she asked again, "What's your name?" Samantha, I replied, did your parents kick you out or did you run away? It's the last day in my foster care, and I need a job if I want to survive. I cut her mid-sentence and told her. She stared at me briefly and then asked me to wait before heading in. About 15 minutes later, she returned and asked me to return in 2 hours for the interview. I almost forgot. Do you have a place to stay? She called out as I was about to walk off. I shook my head in no. 2 years before the incident. Maria snatched the cell phone from a customer's hand and handed it to me. I looked at her, bewildered, as she asked me to go through its gallery. The man started threatening us to return the device. While she blocked him, I looked at the questionable snaps of my inner thighs and under the skirt. I know our uniforms and the place didn't invite such perverts, but these kind of acts were not allowed after the last manager was fired for letting the employees be the subject of such actions. Security was called, who deleted all his pictures of servers and threw him out. It had been almost 5 years since I started living with Maria, who helped me get the job. There were times when I found this job rather tricky due to the nature of this place and the kind of people it attracted. But she was always there to stand up for me. It was nothing compared to what Agatha used to do, so I never complained. Are you stalking me now? I was walking to my apartment when I saw that jacked biker leaning against the wall. I'm just wondering when you would reciprocate my feelings for you. He leaned to my height and said. I had to admit my heart did flutter whenever he was around. It was not just my heart that felt something, though. I stared at his admirable body for a few seconds and walked past him. He did not need to know he turned me on. Is there something wrong with me? Or do you not feel attracted to me? He started walking at my pace. It's not that. Then you are attracted to me. I could feel my cheeks flush at his words, make me groan in embarrassment while he looked at me with that damn charming smile. Fine, 1 dinner date, and if I say no after that, you will back off and stop coming back here. I stood my ground. At least I pretended to. I can promise I can make you say yes, and not just once. I blushed to my ears as he whispered in my ears and walked off. His flirting was getting off the border. I hope I wouldn't have to relieve myself of his thoughts in the shower again. The day of the incident. I opened my eyes from the alarm sound and found him spooning me. His hands were gently placed on my bump, which made me smile. The way he buried his face in my neck made me wonder if the baby was inside or beside me. I wanted to cuddle longer, but I knew if I did, he would skip work and spend the day with me, which we couldn't afford. Our morning hadn't changed since the day he got this job. He would wake up like a whiny kid, not wanting to go to school, but going anyway, while I promised something heated upon his return. But ever since I got pregnant, he feels he needs to take paternity leave to care for the baby in me. I love you, moron. The day I first saw him, I had no idea I would receive a lifetime's worth of love, warmth, and care from this man each day. Antonio had enrolled me in an online fashion design course, and I love him even more for that. I spent my day taking classes, munching on snacks, watching TV, talking to Maria, and practicing. And since the bar used to close early these days, I was expecting my husband to be back by 10. I heard the doorbell when I was watching my favorite soap opera. Wondering why Antonio would ring the doorbell, I looked at the wall clock, which announced that there were still 10 minutes left for the clock to strike 10. He might have forgotten the keys at home. Still, as a precautionary measure, I asked through the intercom who it was. Samantha, it's me, Louis. I was leaving the town when I saw some of Antonio's documents at my place, so I came here to drop him off. I had seen Louis multiple times with my husband before our marriage. The two of them used to hang out quite often, and sometimes I confused him with his younger brother since they looked so familiar. So I opened the door, but watching that girl with him made me flinch. "Oh, this is Marisa, my girlfriend. She told me she wanted to apologize to you for something, so I brought her with me." They walked in, and now that I was looking at him closely, I was sure it was not Louis. I did not want to alert these two that I knew he was not Louis, so I called Antonio, hoping he would remember the code word. I made an excuse that I needed something from upstairs, and I was going to lock myself in a room till my husband arrived, but I felt a sharp pain in my back before I could enter. "You have no idea how long I have been planning my revenge on you for calling me a whore who doesn't have worth. And don't worry, I will take good care of your husband once you die." She stabbed me again in my lower abdomen as I fluttered the words with great pain. "My baby!" I fell to the ground while she laughed, and Louis's brother got on me with a nasty, evil smile that made my skin crawl. Back to present. I woke up screaming, and the nurse hurried to my side while calling for the doctor. There was no longer a bump in my stomach. I looked around, and there was no sign of the baby or Antonio. I started panicking and calling for him, but they told me he left last night and hadn't returned yet. A fleeting voice echoed in my ears when he said something about paying back those who did this to me. Before asking for marriage, he had told me everything about his past, and I had accepted it. So I knew where he could be. I should have been worried about my husband going to jail or our future together, which wouldn't be the same now, but all I could think was revenge. As I placed my hand over my empty womb, I choked up, hoping he would destroy those who killed our baby and snatched our happiness.
Date at her house. I was scrolling through Tinder when I was matched with a woman named Jessica. She was this hot, curvy woman, and just looking at her picture made me feel lustful. I went to check her profile out only to find she was divorced and had a kid. Normally I would have swiped left without a second thought, but something about her intrigued me. I decided to take a chance and message her. As we talked, I found myself becoming more and more interested in her. She was smart, funny, and had a lot of interesting things to say. We chatted for a while, and every time she said something flirty, my heart skipped a beat. I couldn't deny that I was feeling incredibly attracted to her. Despite my reservations about dating someone who was divorced with a child, I found myself wanting to see where this could go. After only 2 days of dating Jessica, I was already having intense and naughty dreams about her. It was as if she had cast a spell on me and I couldn't get her out of my head. One day, while I was lost in thought about her, she texted me, asking if I wanted to come over to her place while her son was away with his dad. I couldn't believe my luck and felt a rush of excitement as I read her message. Without wasting any time, I replied with an enthusiastic yes. She then asked me if I could bring something for her to get high, explaining that she was feeling the urge. Although I wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea of smoking, I couldn't say no to her. I wanted to make her happy and spend as much time with her as possible. I quickly got up and got ready, taking my time to choose the perfect outfit. I finally headed to her place, my heart pounding with anticipation. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to Jessica's door, feeling my nerves fluttering in my stomach. I raised my hand and knocked on the door, my heart beating fast as I waited for her to answer. When the door opened, I was struck by her beauty. She was wearing a stunning teal dress that clung to her curves in all the right places, perfectly complementing her smooth caramel skin. Her hair was styled in loose waves that cascaded down her back, and her eyes glimmered with a hint of excitement. I tried my best to hide the fact that the mere sight of her turned me on, but I couldn't help the way my heart rate quickened and my palms started to sweat. She smiled warmly at me, and I knew this would be a night to remember. Her living room was spacious and tastefully decorated, with a big sectional couch taking center stage. Jessica gestured for me to take a seat, and I sank into the soft cushions, feeling a little nervous but also excited about what was to come. She gave me a seductive smile as she asked me if I had brought what she had asked for. I nodded my head in agreement, took out a roll of pot from my pocket and handed it to her. She lit it with a matchstick and took a long drag before passing it to me. We took a few more puffs, passing the roll back and forth between us, enjoying the moment's intimacy. But soon I realized that I didn't want to smoke anymore. I handed it to her back, and she continued smoking until she finished the last bit of it. Then she got up from the couch, headed towards one of the rooms, telling me that she would be back soon. I waited for her, feeling nervous and excited at the same time. My mind was racing with the possibility of us making love, and I couldn't wait for her to return. She finally emerged from her room after a few minutes and sat on the other end of the couch without saying a word. That's when I noticed the mechanical pencil she was holding. She was gripping it so hard that her knuckles were white. Concerned, I asked her if everything was okay. Instead of replying, she stared at me for what felt like an eternity with a blank expression. It was unnerving. Finally, after 2 minutes of silence, she spoke. There are voices in my head. Hearing her words filled me with an inexplicable sense of dread. I had no idea what she meant, but before I could say anything, she continued. They want me to do something. Her eyes were wide with a weird look on her face, and that's when I noticed the pencil sharpener edge was pointed towards me. I felt the knot form in my stomach as I realized that something was seriously wrong. I hesitantly asked, "Do what?" She looked at me with the same deadpan expression before whispering a reply, "Stab you." My heart was racing as I nervously chuckled, hoping she was joking, but the dead expression on Jessica's face remained the same. Her gaze seemed too intense and fixated on me, and I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. I then hesitantly asked to use her bathroom, got up, and made my way there. As I walked down the hallway, I couldn't help but notice the eerie silence that seemed to pervade the entire house. That was when I noticed her garage door was open, and a chill ran down my spine. Without a second thought, I dashed there and exited through the garage. As I drove home, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. I knew that I had to take action to protect myself from any potential danger. I immediately blocked her from every possible mode of communication and never texted or called again. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and I continued to reflect on that incident. Looking back, I realized how lucky I was to have trusted my intuition and acted on it. I shudder to think what could have happened if I hadn't listened to my gut feeling. It's a lesson that I will never forget and a reminder to always prioritize my safety above everything else.
My recollection of the past could be more precise. Still, as far as I can remember, I believe I was only 4 years old when my mother divorced my biological father and subsequently remarried, ultimately securing my custody. There was something about my stepdad's family that I never liked, and while growing up, I started to avoid them more and more. Although I do not wish to insinuate that my stepfather or his entire family was deplorable, a few individuals within that group made me feel highly uncomfortable, prompting me to distance myself from them as much as possible. I was 11 years old when my step-uncle, whom we'll call Jeff, suddenly started coming to our house more frequently to watch NFL games with my stepdad. They would sit on the couch, drink beer, and cheer for their favorite teams. However, something about Jeff's behavior made me uneasy as time passed. One evening, when my stepdad was passed out on the couch after too much drink, I went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water when Jeff stood near the staircase. His eyes lingered on my body in a way that made my skin crawl, and his smile was unsettling. As he started walking towards me, I felt a knot form in my stomach. I was so scared that I ran back to my room and locked the door behind me, hoping he wouldn't follow. After that, I would see him more than usual, dropping at our house unannounced and flirting with my mom while eyeing me. She didn't pay much attention and would laugh at his weird remark about her body. Eventually, his comments shifted to me as he would say stuff like my beauty takes after her, and while my mom thought he was complimenting her, it was only unpleasant to my ears. I started to lock myself in my room upon his displeasing presence, hoping he would stop coming. A month later, when I returned from school one day, I was greeted by the sight of him sitting on the living room couch, engrossed in yet another NFL game. As my eyes darted around the house, my heart pounding in my chest, I realized no one else was present. The intensity of his presence made me feel extremely anxious and scared. Trying to avoid his gaze, I hurriedly tried to walk to my room, only to be startled when he asked if I wanted to watch football with him. I don't watch TV. I dashed to my room after saying that, but I could feel his gaze pierced on my back before I disappeared into my room and locked it after me. I received a phone call from my mother, notifying me that they wouldn't be coming home tonight and that my Uncle Jeff would be watching over me. Despite my attempts to persuade her that I would be fine alone, she scolded me before hanging up the phone. Sitting in my room, I sighed deeply, wondering how long I could go without food or water. At approximately 10 o'clock, I could no longer endure hunger and thirst. Consequently, I ventured out of my room in search of a quick snack, and as I looked around, he was nowhere in sight, leading me to believe that he had retired to the guest room for the night. As I began to take out some food from the refrigerator, I was unexpectedly startled by the sensation of someone firmly grasping my waist. I jumped at the sudden unwanted touch, only to find Jeff standing there with a nasty grin. By the looks of it, he seemed pretty drunk, and as I tried to get out of the kitchen, he grabbed my hand and pulled me closer, making my body tremble with fear. His grip only got tighter as he touched me inappropriately. While I struggled to escape, I started to cry and begged him to let me go, but the evil smile on his face only grew more prominent. When he didn't let me go, I bit him with my entire strength, summoning to my teeth, which made him angrier, and as he let me go, a slap followed to my cheek, making me fall to a distance. But before he could do anything else, I sprinted to my room and locked it after me. I then started bawling as I dialed Mom's number. She answered after the 5th ring, and as I started telling her everything with my sniffles, what she said in reply filled me with hatred for her. My cries grew louder as I called my biological dad, who instantly picked up my call and began worrying as he heard me bawling. I told him everything, and he disconnected the call after saying he would be here soon to pick me up. About half an hour later, I heard the sounds of someone getting beaten through my room and prayed it not to be my dad getting beaten up. A few minutes later, when he called me, I immediately unlocked the door and rushed to his arms while crying my eyes out. I saw Jeff groaning on the floor from the corner of my eyes as I followed my father outside. I told him I wanted to live with him, and he promised to challenge my custody in court. The next day, 2 officers arrived at my dad's house instead of my mom, informing us that she had filed a report that he kidnapped me after assaulting Jeff. The officers asked me to come with them, but I refused and told them everything that had transpired the night before as I showed them the bruises on my cheek. I also told them what Mom said when I called her crying for help. What's done is done. I'm sure it must be because of something you did, so stay inside your room till we get back tomorrow. My father filed a counter case against them upon my testimony, making my mom's claims false since she was not at the scene. While my mom did say she said what she did to me for my safety since there were no means for them to return immediately, her claims were still denied, and my dad ended up winning my custody. A restriction order for Jeff was issued along with the trials of his crime, and as the investigation began on him, it turned out it was not just me who became a victim of him. He was eventually sent to jail and sentenced to 12 years in prison for all his convictions. I despise football games now, since they remind me of those unpleasant memories, and my dad makes sure never to watch them in front of me. My mom still tries to meet me, but I cannot let go of my hate for her, and I have no idea when I can forgive her, for the words she said that night continue to linger in my mind whenever I think of her. My nanny's troubles. I grew worried when I noticed that Linda, my nanny, seemed uneasy after I told her that she could take a day off. Upon her denial, I approached her and asked if everything was all right and if I could do anything to assist her, expressing my willingness to contact Grandpa for help if necessary. I tried to establish eye contact, grasping her hand in mine, but she avoided it and replied, "No, it's nothing, young miss." With that, she withdrew her hands and walked away into the kitchen. I had a feeling that things were not quite right. It made me want to put my detective skills to work and figure out what was causing Linda's sudden shift in behavior. I couldn't help but wonder if she was considering leaving. However, I decided to keep an open mind and explore other potential reasons for her change in demeanor. Linda has been my nanny since my parents died in that fire when I was 5. Grandpa hired her to care for me, and I had become attached to her over the years. That made me so sensitive to the thought of separating from her. I never wanted to see her get hurt either, because she meant like a mother to me. I closely observed her actions and mannerisms to comprehend her behavior better. It became clear that she avoided making eye contact with me, and her level of distress appeared to increase whenever I was in her presence. This caused me to feel uneasy as I became more concerned that she might leave me. As I dialed Grandpa's number, my heart was heavy with worry. I knew he was at work, and I only called during his work hours in case of an emergency. "Hi, sweetie pie. Is there a problem?" he answered with concern. I hesitated momentarily, then mustered up the courage to ask him the question weighing my mind. "Yeah, no, I just wanted to ask if you're going to fire Linda," I said, my voice laced with sadness. I hoped that if he were, he would change his mind. "No, I'm not," he replied calmly, and I could sense that he was trying to put me at ease. But his response only made me more worried. "Then, is she retiring from being my nanny?" I asked, trying to hold back tears. "Honey, Linda is neither getting fired nor retiring. Who said that to you?" he asked, his tone full of concern. His words were a balm to my troubled heart, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me. "No one. I was just worried about her, that's it. Anyway, thanks, Grandpa. Love you. Bye." I disconnected the call after saying that. Thankfully, this was off my list. Now all I had to do was find out what worried her. With a relieved mind, I settled back into my bed. I feared she would leave, but it seemed I was mistaken. With that worry put to rest, my attention returned to observing her. The meal she prepared was exceptional, featuring all my favorite dishes. This was quite unusual, considering the strict diet I had been following due to my ongoing health issues. Typically, such a lavish feast would only be served on special occasions, such as my birthday or after achieving top grades in school. So, her doing this only made me assume the worst. "Excuse me, Linda, but I must ask, do you have cancer?" I inquired in a grave tone, locking my gaze with hers and causing her to appear bewildered. Typically, when individuals receive a cancer diagnosis or are faced with something similar, they exhibit similar behaviors, I added solemnly. Although my comment elicited a smile from Linda, her expression changed to mournful within a few seconds. Despite this, Linda tried to maintain her smile as if she didn't want to show it to me. "Please do not concern yourself, miss. I assure you that I am in perfect health." Despite her words, I remained unconvinced and concerned about her well-being. After I was done with dinner, I started to feel sleepy, so I went to bed earlier than usual, leaving more inquiries about Linda for the morning. While I was in my sleep, I started to feel suffocation, as if something heavy was covering my mouth. And as I opened my eyes, I felt someone trying to choke me with a pillow. I started struggling, kicking, punching in the air to get away. And just when I could get away from the suffocation of the pillow, I found myself fighting with a sniffling Linda, who was trying to suffocate me. My eyes widened in shock, and at the same time, I was horrified and was trying to get away from her grasp. "Forgive me, I love you, but they have my son." Tears fell rapidly from her eyes as she said that, but all I could think about was how her hands were trying to reach my throat. This wasn't the Linda I had known for years. My nanny was sweet and kind. This had to be someone else. Horrified by everything, I managed to kick her and run away from my room. I did manage to grab my phone before she could catch me. I locked myself in the guest bathroom, hoping she won't find me there, and called Grandpa, telling him everything. While my anxious nanny, who failed to finish me off, searched for me desperately, Grandpa rushed inside, leaving her even more nervous than she already was. He brought police with him, and she was arrested immediately. As they took her away, she kept screaming, "I didn't want to do this! They have my son!" I finally got out of the bathroom and hugged Grandpa with tear-filled eyes. Whatever the reason, I never expected her to be the one to betray me like this. I looked at him with questions about who would do that to me, but it seemed like Grandpa was wondering the same thing. Linda confessed that my aunt and her family conspired to kill me. They tried to persuade her to do that, but when she threatened to report them, they kidnapped Linda's 7-year-old son and started blackmailing her into killing me. She was so distressed because she didn't want to hurt me, but they left her with no choice. My grandpa wanted to make me the sole heir of everything my parents and he owned, which pissed my aunt off, who thought that her cocaine-addicted son was worthy of getting that instead of me. But since my breathing was a hurdle for her into manipulating Grandpa for handing them his assets, she planned to end me, thinking they would get the fortune for being the sole living relatives. Poor them. They have no idea what is coming for them because my grandpa was ruthless in making people's lives a living hell. After getting Aunt and her family arrested, Grandpa helped Linda meet her son again. I know I shouldn't blame my nanny for anything, but the trauma I received that night was so massive that I don't think I would ever be able not to blame her. I realized that no matter how much you love someone, you cannot put them above your kin. After the party ended and everyone left, I was sitting among the pile of gifts, unwrapping and giving most of them disheartening looks. Apart from the thoughtless gifts, some were so unique and intelligent that I was impressed by the person who gave them. As I adorned my wrist with the charming handmade bracelet Ella had gifted me, I was drawn to an exceptional-looking gift box on the coffee table. It was beautifully wrapped with a red and gold ribbon, but no name tag was in sight. While inspecting the gift, I couldn't help but wonder who it was from and what was inside. Curiosity got the best of me, and I cautiously tore off the wrapping paper, revealing a stunning stuffed bear. Its fur was soft and fluffy, and its eyes gleamed like twinkling stars. I was in awe of its beauty and couldn't wait to add it to my collection of cherished gifts. However, I quickly snapped out of my trance and began to tidy up the mess of wrapping paper strewn across the living room floor before my clean freak mother caught me. After cleaning up everything, I went to my room to relax my body through a nice nap. But as I sat on the bed, I was suddenly startled by the sound of static emanating from the living room's television. It was an unusual noise, as we rarely use the outdated device. Irritated by it not stopping, I called out to my mother, wondering if she had turned on the television. When I received no answer, I decided to investigate and see what was happening there. As soon as I entered the room, I noticed her standing in the living area, fumbling with the buttons of the TV remote in exasperation. I couldn't resist a chuckle as I asked her, "What are you doing?" She glared at me with frustration written all over her face and replied, "This stupid thing isn't working." Evidently, she was on the verge of losing her patience and throwing the remote against the wall. "May I assist you with that?" I offered, noticing the struggle on her face as she held the remote. "Allow me to demonstrate." Taking the remote from her hand, I navigated to the TV mode and selected HDMI 1, causing the static screen to transform into a normal display. "Wipe that smirk off your face. Your father is to blame for not teaching me how to use it," she explained as I handed her the remote. Despite her scolding, I couldn't help but burst into laughter, causing her to feel embarrassed. After all the hosting and dancing at my birthday party, I was utterly exhausted, so I eagerly returned to my room to take a much-needed nap. As I lay on my bed and closed my eyes, I drifted to sleep within moments. Unfortunately, my peaceful slumber was cut short by the same annoying static noise from the living room. Despite hoping my mother would turn it off, the noise persisted and I couldn't ignore it any longer. When I got to the room, I was shocked that my mom was not there. What infuriated me even more was that she had left the TV on. Annoyed, I reached for the remote and turned it off. However, as I began to walk away, I heard the TV turn on again. My heart began to race with unease as I slowly turned around to investigate. To my surprise, the TV was still on. With trembling hands, I approached the plug and gingerly removed it, finally ending the eerie noises. After heading to my room and getting into bed, I suddenly received a jump scare by the sound of eldritch whispers from beneath my bed. My entire body began to tremble as beads of sweat formed on my forehead. The whispers persisted and grew louder, leaving me with no choice but to check the source of the unsettling noise. As my heart raced with terror, I mustered up the courage to switch on my flashlight and peered beneath the bed. To my surprise, nothing was there, which only heightened my fear. Carefully rising to my feet, I was suddenly jolted by a knock on the window, sending shivers down my spine as a chill filled the room. With trepidation, I slowly approached the window, but my heart leaped at the presence of a young girl. She appeared to be around my age, with an ashen complexion. Her long, raven-black hair hung in a tangled, disheveled mess, and she wore a dingy white dress that looked like it had not seen a wash in quite some time. As she muttered to herself incoherently, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Despite my trembling fear, I managed to stutter out a question to the mysterious girl as to why she was knocking on my window. Her response was a murmured string of words that initially eluded my understanding, until she repeated them. The bear. I was left perplexed and chilled to the bone, my mind racing to make sense of her cryptic message. The chill in the night air only intensified, causing me to shiver uncontrollably as I struggled to comprehend the situation. That was when I remembered the stuffed bear that I found on my living room table. I asked her if she was talking about the plushie, but the only words she unremitted were the bear. Without any other viable option, I made my way to the haven of my bedroom closet and cautiously unlatched it. With a sense of urgency, I rummaged through the assortment of gifts, ultimately settling on the plush bear as my offering. The bear's intricate details and exquisite craftsmanship nearly swayed me to keep it for myself, but my heart ached as I looked at the girl before me. She seemed to have come from a place of hardship and misfortune, and in that moment, I knew I had to do the right thing. Though it pained me deeply, I took a deep breath and slowly reached the window, extending the bear to her with trembling hands. She instantly grabbed the bear from my hand and flashed me a bright smile before she sauntered away, leaving me in a state of shock. I stood there transfixed as she vanished before my eyes. My heart raced in fear as I woke in a cold sweat, realizing it was a nightmare. Without hesitation, I sprinted towards my closet to check the bear, and as I swung open the closet door and rummaged through the drawer, the bear was nowhere to be seen. The knot in my stomach was followed by my throbbing heart as my eyes caught sight of a handprint on the window pane. The presence of the handprint was enough to make me lose my footing as my body involuntarily trembled with fear. I have kept this spine-chilling experience to myself for years and am hesitant to share it with anyone. My mother didn't believe me when I first confided in her, so I've kept it bottled up ever since. The haunting memory of that young girl still lingers, and I wonder who could have left the ominous bear on my coffee table. I can't shake off the feeling of unease I experienced that day, and I fear that I may never know the truth behind what happened.
My friend Hannah kept badgering me to go on a double date while I kept denying it. Her pleading eyes bore into mine, making it incredibly difficult to say no. However, I remained resolute in my decision that blind dates were not my thing. The thought of spending an entire evening with a stranger trying to feign interest in their life and hobbies seemed disingenuous and uncomfortable. Despite Hannah's best efforts to persuade me, I declined her requests. But when I listened to her proposition, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anticipation. "What if I buy you Taylor Swift's concert ticket?" she asked coyly, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I hesitated momentarily, knowing the tickets had been sold out for quite some time. "You can't. I already checked multiple times. They're completely sold out," I replied, trying to keep my disappointment at bay. But her smile widened, and I couldn't help but feel intrigued. "What if I told you that I know someone who has the ticket but can't make it for some reason?" she teased, twirling a strand of hair around her finger. My heart raced at the thought of finally seeing Taylor Swift live. "Are you serious?" I asked, my excitement barely contained. "You bet, but you'll only get it after the date," she added, her smile beaming. I nodded eagerly, feeling grateful. I've been a Swiftie since I first heard her song You Belong With Me at 11. Since then, I've been dreaming of seeing her, so going on a blind date to get a ticket to one of her concerts seemed like a small price. I thought it should be easy to pretend interested and politely decline any further date, but I was still nervous. I had a compelling reason to steer clear of blind dates due to an unpleasant experience in the past, which left me feeling incredibly uneasy about this one too. However, my adoration for Taylor Swift outweighed my nerves, prompting me to proceed with the plan. I took solace that I wouldn't be alone this time, as Hannah would accompany me, hoping everything would go smoothly and without a hitch. Hannah called me courteously the following morning to remind me about our scheduled date. She cordially requested that I dress up elegantly and not wear a hoodie. It seemed like she had premonitions because I had initially planned on wearing my favorite yellow hoodie along with my cargo pants. However, Hannah loved dressing up, even just for a quick trip to the grocery store. Therefore, I wasn't taken aback when she expressed her concerns about my casual attire. As the date was scheduled for the evening, I spent my day indulging in leisurely activities such as playing games and browsing social media until I received a call from her inquiring about my preparedness. Upon checking the clock, I realized I still had half an hour left. so I hurriedly searched my wardrobe for a suitable outfit. However, since my wardrobe was primarily composed of pants and other casual attire, finding an appropriate dress proved challenging. After exploring various options, my eyes finally rested on a silver dress that Hannah had gifted me on my last birthday. It had been tucked away in my closet ever since. Without further delay, I grabbed the dress and hastened to the bathroom to get dressed. Hannah's eyes met mine as I entered the restaurant, and she let out a chuckle that irritated me even more than the restrictive, uncomfortable dress I wore. I couldn't fathom how she managed to breathe in her outfit. "Why don't you dress like that more often?" she quipped. I rolled my eyes and sat beside her, asking, "So, where are our supposed dates?" "They just went to order something for us," she responded, glancing at a text message on her phone. I also took out my phone, and as I was idly scrolling through Instagram on my phone, the sound of someone clearing their throat caught my attention. I looked up to see hypnotic dark green eyes staring directly into mine. "Hi, I'm Cedric," he said, introducing himself and diverting my attention from his captivating gaze. Taking a seat beside him was another man who introduced himself as Nathan. Hannah leaned in and whispered to me about making conversations with Nathan, making me realize that Cedric was the one who was her crush. Although I was initially uncomfortable, my main objective was to secure the ticket, so I engaged in conversation with my date. Midway through the dinner, Hannah discreetly informed me that she intended to go to Nathan's place, then promptly left me to fend for myself. It was disheartening that she would leave me alone, knowing my apprehension towards unfamiliar individuals. Nevertheless, Nathan remained fixated on his meal, and fortunately, I was not subjected to any discomforting behavior. After a lengthy silence, I mustered the courage to break the ice. "So, you're friends with Cedric?" I inquired. To my surprise, he responded with a curt "no." His answer perplexed me, and I couldn't help but ask, "Then why are you here?" His expression mirrored my confusion as he replied, "I'm a friend of Hannah's. She confided in me that she felt uneasy about this blind date and insisted I come along. Pardon me for asking, but aren't you Cedric's sister?" It suddenly dawned that Hannah had misled me and arranged this meeting under pretenses. Why would she claim I was Cedric's sibling? And more importantly, why would she drag me into this situation if my presence wasn't necessary? Without a second thought, I swiftly punched in her phone number, desperate to get to the bottom of the situation. After what felt like an eternity, she finally picked up on the fifth ring, and my emotions erupted in rage. "What in the world is going on?" I yelled into the receiver. "You better tell me the truth, or else you'll regret it." "I'm sorry, Aurora. I lied to Cedric about hanging out with my friends so that I could get closer to him. He wouldn't have come if I asked him out directly on a date," she explained, her tone apologetic yet unconvincing. My anger grew at the realization that the sly fox had deceived me. "You," I started to say, but she cut me off by mentioning Cedric's arrival before abruptly ending the call. Frustrated, I tried calling her back, only to find she had turned her phone off. "I'm sorry, Nathan. Hannah deceived both of us, but I should go now," I uttered as I settled the bill with cash and promptly exited the restaurant. I tried calling her several times, but her phone remained turned off. Throughout the night, I was consumed with anger, convinced she had manipulated me and was now shamelessly frolicking with that green-eyed guy. It made me question whether she had even been truthful about the concert ticket. Her phone remained off the next day. The same went for the day after, and just like that, the week passed in a blur. Each time I tried reaching her, her number gave the same response. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. My worries were confirmed when I caught a glimpse of the news on the TV and saw something harrowing. They displayed Cedric's photo as a convicted offender responsible for 7 murders, and his last victim was a brunette who wore a slick black dress. With trembling hands, I gazed back at my phone screen, where the operator's voice could be heard simultaneously with the news as she said the number I dialed was switched off.
Isn't it fun going camping with your friends? The sheer joy of being surrounded by the twinkling stars, indulging in fun-filled activities, exchanging secrets, and narrating spine-chilling tales while gathered around a blazing campfire is unparalleled, right? However, what if all this takes a turn for the worse? What if your much-awaited outdoor excursion turns into a living nightmare? Allow me to recount my harrowing experience, where a camping trip with my friends transformed into a spine-tingling ordeal. 7 years ago, as we were cruising down the road in the convertible, Jack suddenly burst out laughing and drew our attention. "Hey, did you see that? Quan just swallowed a bug," he said, still laughing as if he had just delivered the best joke ever, while we all gave him a disapproving look. In response, Quan threw his backpack at Jack in annoyance, making him groan, while he said, "Hey, that's because of the speed of the convertible, you bastard," which made the rest of us laugh. "Why are you so offended? Don't you guys eat bugs for breakfast or something?" He jeered, thinking he was funny, which was only annoying. But Quan wasn't one to back down, and he responded with a sharp retort, "At least our parents are at the breakfast table, unlike yours." "Stop it, you guys. And Jack, you need to stop throwing insults as a joke." It was clear that Jack's sense of humor had gone too far, so I scolded him for his behavior. "Hey, men joke like that among each other. You're a girl, so you don't know," he said, pouting, feeling insulted by my actions. Henry, who had been quiet the whole time, finally spoke up. "I'm also a man, so how come I don't know about such jokes?" he asked, trying to diffuse the tension and lighten the mood. But Jack was already sulking and pouting, claiming that he was joking and we were being mean to him. We all knew his excuses were invalid, and we couldn't help but laugh while he glared at the road ahead with furrowed brows. Although we knew that Jack's intentions were not to cause harm and that he was trying to be funny, his jokes often crossed the line and were hurtful. We have all been victims of his rude sense of humor, but at the same time, he has had our backs whenever we needed him. So despite his weird personality, we genuinely cared about him. The 4 of us were going on a camping trip. There were supposed to be 5, but Claire canceled at the last minute, leaving me all alone with these goofs. Henry was the only person who seemed a bit reliable, not because he was my boyfriend, maybe a little because of that, but mostly because he acted more maturely than others when he needed to. We reached the campsite around 5 in the evening and set up our tents. Nobody else was around in that area except for us, which was fine since we would probably be louder than a truck horn. "So, who got the booze?" Jack asked, glancing in the direction of Quan. He pointed toward the car, and the 2 of them went to the car with arms locked to bring out the rest of the supplies. I could never understand these guys. Nearly an hour ago, they were like 2 negatively charged objects, but now they acted like long-lost brothers who had never quarreled. Releasing a deep sigh, I began to take the food out of my bag. My eyes met Henry, who seemed to be staring at me. "What?" I asked, which made him look away with the embarrassment of being caught. "Nothing," he replied, scratching the back of his neck. I dropped whatever I was doing, walked to him, and looked into his eyes as I asked, "Tell me." "You are just so beautiful that I can't help myself." I smiled while blushing to my ears at his words. "You're so cute." I placed a peck on his lips as I wrapped my hands around his neck, making him pull me and deepen the kiss. I loved my dork. "Gross, you two. Get a room. We're here for fun, not puke." I rolled my eyes at Quan's voice and turned to see them laughing while giving each other high fives. "Shut up, idiot," I said while grabbing a matchstick to start a campfire. When another attempt to light the fire failed, Jack laughed as he remarked, "Are you sure you know how to make a bonfire?" I glared at him in frustration, while he playfully laughed, taking a sip from his beer can. Henry came forward to help me, but the fire wasn't starting. That was when I noticed an eerie, thick white fog spreading in our surroundings and swallowing Jack. We heard his scream from a distance, sending chills down our spines. We started calling for him, but he didn't respond. When we were about to go inside the fog to look for him, an old man emerged. He was wearing all white, had a long white beard, and his eyes were closed. He was giving off an ominous vibe. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine when a part of his beard grew longer and grabbed Henry by his throat. And before I could blink, it pulled him in, and I heard a snap, which made me scream in terror. The man opened his eyes, which were white without any pupil or iris, and his mouth wider than a shark, before putting Henry's head in it, while the beard consumed the rest of the body. He then started crunching his head. The gruesome sight made me shudder in horror, making me so sick that I was ready to throw up when Quan grabbed my hand and started running. I was so horrified that I couldn't process what was happening, and that was when I felt Quan's hand being pulled away from me. I turned to see a white beard wrapped around him. I didn't want to let him go too, so I grabbed his hands even tighter and started pulling, but instead, I was the one being pulled toward the man. I saw a single tear fall from his eyes as Quan pulled away his hand to let me escape. I couldn't help but scream his name as I saw him being consumed before I started running. I kept running and running without looking back until I found the highway. He didn't follow me for some reason, and I don't remember how, but I somehow managed to get to a police station and report everything. They seemed not to believe me, but they still assured me they would look for my friends. After getting to my apartment, I felt sick and couldn't eat or sleep for days. I even threw up multiple times. When I finally managed to sleep, I found myself getting chased by the same old man whose mouth was open, and he was this close to catching me when I woke up panting, covered in sweat. The police never found my friends, and after what happened to them, I know they never will. But despite being able to escape it that night, I'm still getting chased by him every time I close my eyes. My name's Charlie, and I live in a small rental home with my sister Sam. The two of us are living together because the rent for these apartments is too high, and since we don't make enough money to afford them separately, we decided to share an apartment as roommates. I was already thinking of renting a shared apartment, so when Sam suggested it, I agreed without hesitation. Living with my sister was better than doing that with a stranger, as you never know what kind of people we end up meeting. And since one of our father's friends had his house vacant, he rented that to us cheaply. Cherry, Peter is coming over tonight. You don't have any issue, right? Note that she isn't asking me this. Her tone sounded more like, you better not have any issue with it. It's not like you would ask him not to if I say I have an issue, I muttered, which she heard. You're such an understanding sister, you know. I love that about you. Anyway, I'm so excited. What should I wear? She said all this cheerfully, only to annoy me more. Why can't you get banged at his place? Why do you do this here? And make this awkward for me? I asked, raising my voice so that it can reach her ears, since she must be in her room by now. No can do. Besides, I feel uncomfortable with his roommate there. Have you seen his eyes? It's like he's looking into your soul. Her faint voice coming from her room was still crystal clear, but I was going to ignore that if it was of no use. So I rested my body on the couch and turned the TV on. She spent hours cleaning herself and getting ready for him, and it was almost laughable. I wanted to make fun of her for looking so clean every time Peter came over to stay, but I controlled myself and continued watching TV. The douche got here around 6 in the evening, and after getting away from my sister's lips, he kneaded me in the head. "And how is my cherry doing?" As I got away from his grip, he said in an overly friendly voice, "It's Charlie for you. And Sam, tell your boyfriend to stop acting like we are friends or something," I said as I got back to watching my show. "Come on, can I call my future sister-in-law by her nickname? Aren't we best friends?" He took a seat next to me and asked dramatically, "We were, but you ruined it by dating my sister. So there, you can't." I looked him in the eyes and I said that. "Cut him some slack, Cherry. Can't you see he's trying his best?" And his lawyer joined in to defend him. "I am, but tell me that if you two ever were to break up, I would choose you. Yes, I was angry that he ruined our friendship, and yes, I would choose my sister over our friendship." Sam smiled at what I said, while Peter pouted. The two of them chit-chatted some more in my presence, and then they went to Sam's room. After watching the aired episode of Black Mirror, I went to my room and started scrolling through Facebook. I was getting a bit hungry, and since I was not in the mood to cook, I decided to order some burgers from McDonald's. Not like I have any intentions of disturbing those two, but out of common decency, I was obliged to ask those two what they wanted to eat. "Hey Sam, I was going to order from McDonald's. Do you guys want anything?" I wasn't going to knock on their door and listen to their indecent voices, so I gave her a call. She told me to order a Big Mac meal and a crispy chicken sandwich meal for them and hung up. Along with what she asked, I added a McDouble and a blue raspberry frozen Fanta for myself before placing the order. It showed the order would reach me in 25 minutes, so I played a song on my phone and started waiting for it. About 15 minutes passed, and thinking about closing the curtains, I went near the window when I saw a man standing outside the front porch looking in the direction of my bedroom. He wasn't wearing any McDonald's uniform, nor was he holding any package, so clearly he wasn't here to make a delivery or something. But I still opened the app to check if the delivery guy was here, and it showed he was 7 minutes away from my place. I quickly closed the curtains and went back to my bed in a panicked state. It felt creepy that a weird man would just stand outside someone's house and stare at it. What if he was a murderer or a thief? Since I couldn't shake off this fear I was feeling, I tried to take a peek out of my window, and when I did, there was no one outside. The man was gone. I felt a bit relieved by that, so I stepped back from there and threw myself back at the bed, only to receive the call that my order was here. I went out to pick up the order, and as I was taking it, I noticed someone standing a bit far from the house, staring straight at me. As his eyes met mine, I swear that I saw him smile. I started getting cold sweats, so I rushed back in and locked the door after me. I ran to Sam's room and started knocking loudly. "What is it?" She looked annoyed as she opened the door, but the moment she saw me shaking like a leaf, she got worried. After I told them about the man, Peter went out to check. But even after looking everywhere, he didn't see anyone. I was scared, but I didn't want to disturb the two of them any more than I had, so I handed them the package and went straight to my room. The feeling that if I look outside the window, he would still be there looking at my bedroom window kept me anxious all night. But eventually, I fell asleep. He never showed up again after that, but still, that night remained a horrible memory in my mind, along with some unanswered questions. Who was that man? And what was he doing there? Was he some creep who was doing nothing but staring at someone's house? Or was he someone far from dangerous than I can imagine? Going viral. You might have heard of the popular slang term Karen trending lately. For those unaware, this term describes a particular demographic of white women who belong to the middle class. These women are often intrusive, unpleasant, irritable, or bigoted. I once was one of those people who would put a hateful comment on a viral Karen video, saying something like, "Where do even these people come from?" or "She saw that one coming," etc. But it was only when I became the subject of wrongful hate by a TikToker that I came to know that not every single one of those women shown in the wrong light through the person filming them is truly what you would call a Karen. Firstly, let me tell you a little about myself. I am 25 and a single mother of a 3-year-old boy, Noah. I had a thing with his father during my final year in college. Although I informed him about his son, I wanted to impose the title of father on him only if he was prepared. Therefore, I never encouraged him to take on the responsibility. Due to my unexpected pregnancy, I couldn't pursue my career as an attorney, so I got a job as a bookkeeper through my friend's connection. I know, an entirely different career from someone with a law degree, but since I couldn't give a bar exam for maternity reasons, I couldn't practice law. It's not like I've given up on my dream. I'm just waiting for my son to grow up a little. Noah is my utmost concern, and I'm ready to go to any lengths for him, even if it seems strange or unconventional to others. My employer allowed me to bring my son to work as he understood the responsibilities of being a single parent. He, too, was a single father of lovely twin daughters and had a fondness for children. He even had a daycare constructed on the first floor of the company building to provide convenience for single parents who needed to look after their children. Things were going smoothly until the day I was returning from work and discovered a truck obstructing my driveway. I exited my car and knocked on the truck's window, finding 2 boys making a TikTok video inside. "Excuse me, can you move your truck? It's blocking my way," I said, hoping they would, but they looked at each other and shook their head instead of doing that. "Can you wait till we finish this video?" one of them said, and then focused back on filming. "Can't you move for a minute and let me pass? You can continue making your video." "Listen, Karen, we'll only move after we finish our video, so hold your horses by then." I was taken aback by being addressed by that term. It wasn't like I did something to deserve to get called that, so it made me angry. "Mind your tongues. That's my driveway you're blocking, and I don't have time to wait another 30 minutes for you to finish some silly TikTok, so move it, will you?" I was pissed. My son was crying inside the car, and these boys prevented me from entering my house. Their cameras had turned to film me, now while they called me Karen and started blaming me for being so rude to them for entirely false reasons. I understand you want to earn your fame by making videos and posting them online, but that doesn't mean you can go around disturbing other people's lives for that. After arguing with them for another 10 minutes, when I noticed it wasn't going anywhere, I gave up and returned to my car. I picked up Noah to try and calm him when my nose picked up a smell from his diaper. This was already the last one that I changed on my way here, and since there was no spare left, I had to wait till those 2 moved their truck. Noah was the kind of kid who wouldn't stop crying until he was out of his dirty diapers or pants. So I had to walk to them again and ask them to move. "We won't move until our video is finished, bitch." Their camera was once again facing me, and before I could say anything else, one of them opened a bottle of water and threw it on me. I had enough of their bullshit, so I returned to my car and dialed 911, informing them of everything while asking for help. A local patrolling officer arrived within a few minutes and finally made them move their truck. I rushed inside after parking my car and bathed Noah before changing him into a new set of clothes. There was much left to do at home, like cleaning, washing Noah's and my dirty clothes, and hopefully a nap before I started preparing dinner. A week after that incident, my friend Emily shared a video asking if it was me. I was confused about what she was talking about, But once I opened it, I was horrified to see a video of me with over 1 million views going viral with the caption, "Karen got what she deserved." It was edited in a way that made me look bad. "Mind your tongue. That's my driveway. Go away, you people." These were taken from my sentences, making me look like an angry, nosy woman. And there was a part at the end where they threw water at me. The comment section was filled with hate, where people were egging them on to do worse things to me, where some people said I would have just slapped her mouth shut or something similar. I also had a TikTok page of myself where I used to share my baby's videos or pictures where my face was shown in some of them. People started dropping the Karen word even on them. I thought it would calm down in a few days, but when I was shopping in Target with my baby, a teenage TikToker recognized me and turned the camera toward me saying, "Karen spotted." I knew arguing with a brainless teenager who doesn't want to think outside their comfort zone would be entirely pointless. So I got out of there and asked the neighborhood community for the CCTV footage of that day when those people were a nuisance to me. I uploaded that video to my baby's account and explained the situation. It didn't cross as views as the other viral video, but there were still positive responses. People removed their negative comments and apologized for judging me too harshly. Some even sympathized with me, while others said I could have waited for them to finish their videos. I don't know if it's because of hate, but that experience was one of the most horrifying and terrible. It's been 3 years now, and it's a relief that people have forgotten me over other viral videos while I'm preparing for my bar test. My boyfriend cheated on me. Once upon a time, in the vast world of Snapchat, I found a friend named James. Our story began with a simple snap, a fleeting moment that turned into a beautiful connection. Little did I know that this seemingly innocent friendship would soon morph into a love story that unfolded in the digital realm. We exchanged snaps daily, sharing our lives, dreams, and random moments. James and I became inseparable in the Snapchat universe, creating a bond that felt real despite the distance between us. Our conversations were filled with laughter, emojis, and the occasional blurry selfie. It was as if that social media had become our own little love sanctuary. One day, as I was scrolling through my Snapchat feed, I stumbled upon a text that shattered my digital fairy tale, a message from James to another girl, filled with sweet words and promises that were meant for me. My heart sank, and confusion took over. Was this some kind of cruel joke, or had our love story been a facade? In a daze, I confronted James through that media, my fingers typing out the words that I never thought I would have to send. "James, who is she?" I asked, attaching a screenshot of his incriminating message. The little dots indicating his typing appeared, and my anxiety intensified with each passing second. "I can explain," he replied, attempting to rationalize his actions. But his explanations were nothing more than feeble excuses that couldn't mend the breach of trust. This digital world we had created, where our love story unfolded, was now tainted with betrayal. "I thought we had something special," I said, my disappointment evident in the words I typed. "How could you do this to us?" Our online conversation turned into a battlefield of emotions. Hurtful words were exchanged, emojis lost their playful charm, and our once vibrant snaps became tainted with sorrow. It was the end of our digital love story, a story that had started with a simple snap and was now unraveling before my eyes. Heartbroken, I made the painful decision to end our relationship. The love that had blossomed in the pixels of Snapshot was now reduced to memories and shattered illusions. I deleted our shared snaps, trying to erase the remnants of a love story that had crumbled into pieces. Time passed, and healing began. I focused on rebuilding my life beyond the confines of the digital realm. Friends became my support system, and real-life experiences replaced the once cherished snaps. The wound started to heal, but the scars of betrayal lingered, a constant reminder of a love story that had soured. As I navigated through the journey of moving on, a new chapter awaited me. One day, I received a Snapchat notification, a message from someone new. Tentatively, I opened the snap to find a friendly greeting from a stranger named Alex. "Hey there, I came across your snaps, and you seem like an amazing person. Mind if we chat?" Curiosity sparked, and I replied with a simple, "Sure." Little did I know that this seemingly casual conversation would evolve into something beautiful. Alex and I exchanged snaps filled with laughter, shared interests, and genuine connection. Our friendship blossomed into a new kind of love story, one grounded in honesty, trust, and the lessons learned from past heartbreak. The scars of betrayal became a roadmap, guiding me toward a love that was authentic and enduring. As our bond deepened, Alex and I decided to meet in person, bridging the gap between the digital and real worlds. The nervous excitement of that first meeting mirrored the early days of my social media journey with James. But this time, it felt different. It felt right. As we shared our experiences, dreams, and fears in person, the digital realm took a backseat. Social media, which once played a central role in my love story with James, became a mere platform for casual updates. The wounds of the past had healed, and I embraced the present with a newfound appreciation for genuine connections. Months passed, and Alex and I continued to build our relationship beyond the confines of social media. Our love story evolved with each shared moment, whether digital or real. The lessons learned from the betrayal with James became the foundation for a love that was resilient and true. One day, as Alex and I strolled through the park, he turned to me with a smile and said, "You know, our story started with a simple snap, just like the one that brought you and James together." I chuckled, realizing the irony of it all. True, but our story is different. It's real, grounded in trust and honesty. He nodded, and that's what makes it special. As we continued our walk, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had led me to this moment. The pain of betrayal had been replaced by the warmth of a genuine connection, and the scars of the past had become a testament to resilience. And so, my love story continued, not confined to the pixels of a Snapchat screen, but woven into the fabric of real-life moments and shared experiences. The digital world, once a source of heartache, had transformed into a platform for new beginnings, reminding me that love could endure even after the pixels faded away. One day, as I was walking down the street, I unexpectedly bumped into James. He looked at me with regret in his eyes and said, "I'm sorry for what I did." However, I chose not to dwell on the past. Ignoring his apology, I walked away, determined to continue my journey without him. The hurtful memories lingered, but I knew that moving forward was the right choice. The simplicity of walking away spoke louder than any words he could offer. In that moment, I embraced the strength to let go and focus on the new chapter of my life, leaving the echoes of our shattered social media love story behind. Many people go through something like this at least once in their life. It's a common experience where someone we trusted hurts us. When I first read Martin Luther's quote, "The devil can so completely assume the human form when he wants to deceive us," I thought he was talking about the real one, Lucifer. Despite watching the news of crimes daily, I only realized this was about evil in humans when I experienced it myself. "Excuse me, sir, are you Aiden?" I gently tapped the man's shoulder, hoping he was not the person I sought. Despite sitting at the same table my date had specified, he looked nothing like the pictures I had seen. To my dismay, he responded, "Yes, I am, and you must be Aurora. You look even more stunning in person than in your photos." I struggled to conceal my disappointment, and he seemed to notice my reaction, but still chose to disregard it. After thanking him for the compliment, I hesitantly took my seat before the waiter came and handed us the menus. However, before I could even get a chance to look at the menu to decide what I wanted to eat, he ordered for me without even asking. Such behavior is something I despise. No matter if I'm out with friends, family, or a date, it puts me in a bad mood. Though I refrained from voicing my displeasure, I quietly sipped my water as I waited for the Greek salad that had been selected for me, all the while lamenting my decision to agree to this date. Out of the blue, he apologized and explained that the photos he sent me were actually of his friend. He revealed that he had only done so because of his insecurities. I met him on OkCupid a few days ago and have been chatting ever since. Initially, I was presented with a picture of a tall, muscular Latin man. However, upon meeting him in person, he appeared shorter than me and did not possess the Latin features I had expected. What put my mood off wasn't his looks or height, since my ex was also shorter than me, but the fact that he lied. At that moment, I felt deceived and apprehensive about the date. It felt fake to me, but I did not want to be impolite by leaving immediately, so I decided to finish the lunch, at least before I started ghosting him. As I was eating, he started asking me all these weird and awkward questions that were highly inappropriate. I told him I was uncomfortable answering them, but he took it lightly and started laughing as he said I was making a big deal out of nothing. I wasn't a fool not to notice all the red flags he kept dropping on me. It was becoming increasingly clear that things could escalate and become dangerous if I didn't remove myself from his company. After finishing the meal, I got up, saying, "Thanks for the meal. I'll be leaving now. It was a pleasure meeting you, though." He scrunched his forehead in confusion and unexpectedly grabbed my hand, uttering, "What are you doing? Our date is not over yet. You ought to come over to my place." I yanked my hand back in shock and horror. What's wrong with this man? We barely conversed enough for me to feel obligated to adhere to his request. I quickly invented an excuse, citing an urgent matter at home, and exited without causing a commotion. Despite my attempts to evade him, he persisted in his pursuit. He made another grab for me, but I managed to dodge him. As I continued walking away, he followed me, demanding I stop. I reiterated that I couldn't stay, but he responded with a barrage of insults. He accused me of being inexperienced in dating and insulted my appearance, insisting that I should feel grateful for the opportunity to be with him. Though I was tempted to retaliate with equally cutting remarks, I refrained from causing a scene and kept walking, determined to put as much distance between us as possible. He didn't stop following me. His footsteps grew louder and closer as he shouted that I would regret it if I didn't stop. I was highly disturbed and scared at this point, praying for him to give up. But suddenly, he shoved me roughly from behind before blocking my path. My heart was thumping so loud that I feared it would come through my throat. I wished for someone to notice us and come to my rescue, but people kept walking by without paying attention. His gaze swept from my forehead to my toes as he scrutinized me. Suddenly, he burst out laughing and remarked, "You look like you're about to cry." His demeanor gave off a disturbing vibe, and he leaned toward my ear to whisper what he wanted to do to me. He told me that this was nothing in comparison to how much I would cry even more by the time he was done with me. I shot panicked glances at the people walking, but it was useless. As he was about to say something else, adrenaline rushed through my veins as I gathered the courage to kick him in his groin and run toward the station without looking back. Tears started flowing through my eyes as my legs sped up and reached the station. I hadn't eaten or drunk anything since morning and was on the urge to faint when someone grabbed me, which made me jump in fear that it was Aiden again. Instead, it was a middle-aged woman asking me if I was okay. My swollen, tear-filled eyes, red and sniffling nose, and disheveled look didn't let me say anything, and she started patting me on the head, saying everything was fine. She led me to the nearest cubicle, and I sat there for about half an hour shaking, and the woman just stayed beside me to ensure I was okay. When I realized I was wailing in front of a stranger, I immediately apologized for wasting her time. "It's okay. You don't have to apologize. It's not your fault. I was the one who chose to help you," she said politely as she flashed me with an angelic smile. I thanked her before heading inside and taking the metro to my place. I deleted Aiden, and my WhatsApp chat, blocked his number, and deleted all the dating apps from my phone. I spent days locked up inside my apartment, fearing he would find my place and come for me. However, it's a relief that nothing of such sort happened. I didn't meet anyone for days and started avoiding blind dates or meeting alone with strangers. This happened years ago, and to this day, it's the worst first date experience I have ever had. My friends still try to set me up with people for being single for this long, but I turn each one down. While she did not meet me when Aiden threatened me, that woman who offered me solace and water still felt like an angel. She dropped whatever she was doing, whether urgent or not, and made sure I was okay, unlike those who saw me in danger and still chose to ignore me. People like her are rare these days, and I pray they don't get extinct, because it would be the end of humanity then.
I lived in a small neighborhood in Morro Bay, and while growing up, I had always heard a rumor that there was a huge hidden treasure somewhere inside the woods of Morro Rock, and if someone gets as lucky as to find it, they would be able to feed their generations for ages. I didn't believe the rumor because, come on, if there was such a thing as a treasure that could feed one for generations, then the government would be the first one to hunt it down. But despite the rumors being groundless, my friends always talked about it, and looking at the way they talked, they seemed rather interested in hunting it. I tried explaining to them a few times that obsessing over something as a fake treasure would only be a waste of time, but they never listened to me. Instead, as time went by and as we grew older, they only got more vehement about finding the treasure. One day when I was cleaning the old garage along with my father, we came across Grandpa's few old possessions. My curiosity drove me to go through them, and just when I was looking through some old pictures and a few tiny boxes, my gaze went to an ancient-looking piece of paper. Looking at the muddy yellow was surrounded with dampness made it turn brittle. I could easily say the paper was quite old, so I took it out of the box and opened it, only to find it to be a map. I could tell it was the map of Morro Bay, which has every old area drawn on it. One could even say it was too detailed. Well, it didn't surprise me looking at how my grandpa was a cartographer, and a good one at that. As I gave Grandpa's things another glance, I could feel each one of them had accommodated a precious memory in them. So I put everything back where it belonged after cleaning the dirt that had been covering them. Just as I was leaving the garage to give myself a clean shower, my cell phone started ringing. I took it out of my pocket and checked who was calling me, and the name flashing on the screen was Roy. Along with being my best friend, he was one of those who was set up on finding the treasure. "Dude, meet me at Rick's place at 5 and don't be late," he started the moment I answered the call, as disconnected it after finishing up the sentence. I stared at the phone for a few seconds trying to grasp the situation, and then looked at the time. It was already 5:25 p.m. and I was covered in the garage's dirt. It would at least take me 20 minutes for me to drive to Rick's and at least 10 for me to clean myself up, so I had to start right away. After I was done with the shower and dressing up, Mom called for me asking me to buy eggs from the supermarket. Since I could never say no to her, I had to go there, which took another 15 minutes out of the limited time Roy had assigned me with. Anyway, After completing all the unfinished tasks, which by the way was hanging laundry after delivering eggs, I finally reached half an hour late. I knew he was going to be more than 10 minutes late. Now give me my $10, Colin said, giving a high five to Ricky while a disappointed Roy handed the money to him. For God's sake, I was cleaning the garage when you called me. I thought something was urgent. Anger fueled in as I realized what was going on. Come on, Alan, don't get upset. It was just a bet as a joke among friends. Besides, we did call you for something important. My anger subsided as Roy said that. What is it about? I asked, sitting on the couch beside others. We are thinking of going camping in Morrow Woods, Colin said after clearing his throat. And what are the chances that we stumble across the buried treasure there? Ricky said with a greedy grin on his face. Not with this nonsense again. You know the treasure isn't real. They were getting on my nerves now with this stupid, constant song about it. But what if it is? Think about it, Alan. If we can acquire that treasure, the things we would be able to do, the luxury we would afford would be nothing like anyone can. Roy's eyes lit up as he described those things. I looked at them in pity, and an idea popped into my mind. I did find an ancient map of those woods that Grandpa had safely hidden away, I said while looking hesitantly at them. And trust me, all of their eyes started shining sparks as if I had just told them the spot of treasure. After that, all of them started to insist that I go with them on the camping trip, and I agreed, as well as looking how I determined to remove the worms from their minds. The four of us decided to meet the next evening at Colin's house, as it was closer to each of our houses, and he was the only one with a car among us. I sent a picture of the map to all of them before meeting them the next day, and as we were gathering at the decided place, Colin finally revealed that his car had an issue and wasn't starting. Ricky gave us an idea that since we each had a snap of the map, why don't we set on a hunt individually, and whoever finds it first would inform the others. I didn't want to say anything, but I sensed the ulterior motive behind his words. He wanted to reach for the treasure before anyone else and take it all for himself, and by the looks of it, others had started to think the same thing. It was too bad, though, that each one of them was going to be disappointed when they didn't find anything at all. Another suggestion was made by Roy that we go on teams instead, since going alone would be too dangerous, all the while volunteering himself to come with me. I agreed, and so did the other two, and so we finally went in a different direction after reaching the woods, and the hunt began. After around 2 hours of looking, Roy excused himself to take a dump and went a bit far from where I was standing, only to come back after half an hour. I wasn't one to judge others' timings at taking a dump. Everyone has their own needs, so we continued walking forward, when I suddenly felt Roy's pace getting slower. I'm sorry, Alan. I turned around after hearing him mumble under his breath, only to see him take out a sharp knife from his bag. He then looked at me with dead serious eyes, which sent chills down my spine. What do you think you're doing, Roy? If this is for the map, rest assured that it's fake, and even if you do find treasure, I will never ask for a single penny of it. Put the damn knife away. It was as if my words weren't reaching his ears, because he kept looking at me with the same terrifying eyes and walking towards me. Just as he lunged over me, I grabbed a rock from the ground and hit him on the head, which made him stumble, but wasn't enough to make him unconscious. He looked at me again with more rage-filled eyes. This time, I knew for sure he was going to kill me, and he did stab me, but on my hand as I blocked the knife with it. Snap out of it! I kicked him in his gut as I screamed at him, but it looked like nothing was working on him. It was as if he had turned into some kind of greedy monster that could see nothing but treasure. Even calling others for help was of no use since they didn't respond, and I had to do something or he was going to kill me. As I struggled to avoid getting stabbed to death, I grabbed a slightly bigger stone and hit him again on the head, accidentally a bit harder. His brain smashed out, and he fell to the ground. A terrified scream escaped my throat as I saw his lifeless body, his hands still holding the knife. I ran to get out of the woods, only to stumble across something and fall to the ground. As I looked around, I saw Colin lying dead on the ground with multiple stab wounds, and not too far from him was Ricky in the same state as him. He didn't go to take a dump, I mumbled with shaken words as I somehow managed to get myself up and ran out of the woods. This isn't what I wanted when I told them about that map. I couldn't stop my tears from streaming through my eyes as my heart pounded like crazy in terror, as if I was ready to jump out of their throat any minute now. As I ran out, covered with sweat, tears, and snot, I couldn't help but think that greed had taken over their minds for them to become insane like that. The Adam and Eve store in London, I became the manager in the very first store that was established there. There were a lot of people that were coming into the store, and then there were things that they would buy that might not look good to certain people but are actually ordinary. This is what happened outside the store one night. The shop usually has different employees in the night, but this time, due to some reason, I was to be in the shop for the night shift, and I was there just standing and waiting as the customers get what they want, and I would bill them up and send them on their way with a little bit of judgment thrown along the way, just out of the human nature, not that I really cared about it. So it's the Monday night, and we don't usually get many customers on a Monday, so I was just hanging around the shop without much to do, and just pressing myself through the door, looking across at the Chinese place and thinking of ordering some Chinese food for myself. I had no idea what time it was. It must have been too late, and I was waiting for my order to arrive. It had been around 30 minutes, and even though it was just a few feet away from the doorstep, I wondered why they were late. Around 30 minutes late. I asked them, and they said that there had been an accident in the kitchen, and that is why the order was a bit late. And then they put the order on the house, and I didn't have to pay for it. I took the free meal and pulled my chair by the door and started watching outside the door. It was a dull day, and there was just enough entertainment on the streets of London for us to have while eating our Chinese food. I looked outside, and there was a bit of fuss gathering around in the middle of the street. And then just minutes in, a fight breaks out, and these two tall guys are hitting each other with their bare fists. It looked really painful, and people were trying to get away from each other, but they were just at it, angry and wild. Then one of the guys picked up the chair from the Chinese place and threw it over the other guy, and then I thought of closing the door before they get into the shop I was working in. Blood was oozing out of their face, and they were throwing fists and calling each other out, and you could literally hear the sound of their bare fists hitting them in the face. And then, after a few moments, one of the guys threw the chair again, and this time, the other guy, he ducked and saved himself. But the chair came flying and hit the door of the shop, and it broke. And next thing you know, these guys entered my shop, and their fight was not ready to stop. And everyone was now too scared to break their fight. Even I was scared of getting between them. So after 2 failed attempts of trying to stop the fight, I got out of the shop. To me, that was the only logical decision I could have made in the moment, followed by another, which was calling the police. They were going at each other, beating each other with everything or anything they could find. They were using everything they could find in the store and destroying it in the process. I was hoping that they would stop, but there was no way anyone was risking getting in between that. And then, in all their rage, one of the guys picked up the straps for bondage and used it, and wrapped it over another guy and started choking him wildly, and he was very aggressive in doing that. The other guy was down and helpless and was gasping for air, trying to find something to hold as he was getting strangled hard by the other guy, and I was just worried about the damage that they were causing in their scuffle. And then the guy who was getting strangled got hold of a glass-shaped dildo, and with it power, ran it through the face of the other guy, and he fell and turned over. And as he did, the guy took the now broken glass dildo and then stabbed it right in the heart of the man, and killed him as the blood drained out of his heart, and our store was now the place of crime. The police did came, but they were 30 minutes late. The store was closed for next 1 month, and it took a month more to clean up the place and get it ready. The most interesting thing about it was the newspaper headlines. They all said, "Death by Dildo" as their headlines. What? Horrifying incident on a beach? Well, I have one, but I don't think that will interest you. I said when I, Mom, and Carla were playing Truth and Dare, and Carla dared me to tell a horrifying incident related to the beach. "Just tell us, you overdramatic fool," she smacked my back and said. "Okay, fine," I sighed and started my story. It was one summer when I went on a beach vacation with my high school friends. We decided to drive there, but no one among my friends was allowed to drive. So the only person who was old enough to drive and had a driver's license was me. You know, people love their cars more than humans, and nobody trusted my driving skills. So as a result, the only car that I would take with us was the one that had been parked in my garage for almost a year now. That was my Aunt Helen's car. She left it there before going abroad, at least that's what my mom told us. We decided to meet outside my house at 4 p.m. and then drive to the beach. So we packed our stuff and met at the decided time. I had already cleaned the car during the day, but my mom did not know about me taking Aunt's car because she's pretty strict about us touching it without Aunt's consent, and Aunt Helena hasn't contacted us ever since she left. "What's this weird smell?" Ashley said as soon as she went inside the car. "It's you!" We high-fived while bursting into laughter at Ron's reply. "Shut up, asshole. I'm talking about the smell in the car," Ashley said in frustration. "Come on, Ash, don't be a princess. The car hasn't been driven in ages, so of course there will be a weird smell in here," Ron said while pushing Ashley and Serena's luggage into the back trunk of the car. "I have a question for Ash." Sarah and I tried controlling our laughter as Ron said that, because we all knew that Ron loved to tease her to get a reaction out of her. "Here we go again," Ashley said, rolling her eyes. "How many days are we going to stay at the beach? I mean, we'll be back by Sunday evening, but if you're planning to stay longer, we don't mind helping you find a place." As he said that, we all burst into laughter while Ashley started smacking him. The trip was only for 2 days, so we didn't pack that much, but the girls brought their suitcases as if we were going for an entire week or something. The car seemed a bit rusty, but it was pretty hard to open and close the trunk, but we still managed to do it. After everyone was settled in, we headed on the road to the beach. "How long till we reach there?" Sarah asked. 20 more minutes, Sarah. It's the third time in the last 10 minutes that you've asked me this," I replied in annoyance. "No one can blame her. You're driving way too slow, man," Ron added a remark. "I'm driving a normal speed. It's you guys who are impatient," I said while speeding up the car a little. After about 15 minutes, we reached there. We had already rented a beach house, so the first thing we did was park the car there and head inside for some rest. As Ron and I were resting, the two girls came out in their swimsuits, all ready to hit the beach. "It's 7:15 p.m., Ash. Why don't we party in the beach house tonight and go to the beach tomorrow morning?" Ron said. But it was no use because they had already made up their minds to have the beach fun at night. Ron sighed and got up. After that, we decided to do some barbecuing on the beach. I had already brought the things needed for that, so I went to the parking lot and brought them from the car. As I opened the trunk, I thought that Ashley was right. The car does smell pretty weird and bad. As I was taking them out, I couldn't help but notice that the trunk space seemed lesser than it should have been. I tried looking around, but I couldn't find anything. I was going to look a bit more, but that's when Ron called and asked me to hurry up. I locked the car and went toward the beach. We set up the grill and started the preparations for the barbecue. "Hey man, your mom's calling you." Ron was taking some pictures of the girls from my phone. That's when he shouted. "Don't answer. She doesn't know about our trip," I replied while putting the meat on the grill. And as I was saying this, he put the phone over my ears while shrugging his shoulders, pointing that he had already answered it. "Where are you, Marcel? Did you take Aunt Helena's car with you?" she asked in an angry and panicked tone. "Sorry, Mom. I promise there won't be a single scratch on it," I replied in an apologetic tone and glared at Ron for answering the call. "Listen to me very carefully, Marcel. Do not open the trunk no matter the cost. Do you understand me?" She was panicking more than I thought she would, and the way she was behaving felt weird to me. "We already used it, Mom. It's fine." As I said that, she shouted, "Do not talk back to me, boy. Do as I say, and I will bring my car by morning. So don't you touch the car or let anyone else touch it." She hung up after saying that. I looked over in the direction of the others, but they did not seem to notice as they were busy enjoying themselves. We partied all night, but for some reason, I could not stop thinking about the car. After a few hours, the party moved inside the beach house and we all continued drinking. When everyone fell asleep, I decided to go check the car. I went there and opened the trunk. After that, I started looking everywhere for the reason for Mom acting the way she did. Except for unusually less space, nothing seemed wrong. But then I tried to look around to see why the truck had less space than it should have been. After a while, I noticed a few layers which were added in a way that made it look like it was already designed that way. The bad smell was unbearable after looking at it this close. I struggled for a few hours, and then finally was able to remove that layer. But what I saw after that made me freeze from this horrifying feeling. There was a skeleton in there, and which seemed like a woman because there was a green dress over it. The bad smell had spread through the entire car and parking lot. That was when I remembered where I had last seen this dress. It was when Aunt Helena came to our house before going abroad. Before heading out of the house, I talked with her that day for a bit, and she was wearing the exact same outfit as the skeleton. I closed the trunk and put everything in its place as it was, and that was when I received a call from Mom. I answered it and heard her saying, "You opened it, didn't you?" This is a true story that I witnessed at my high school. A boy was murdered in front of me and my classmates, and the shocking thing was that it was all just over a silly Instagram chat. At the time, I was 14, and my high school was big enough that was intersected by two main buildings. The intersection point was a cafeteria where all the students used to go during lunchtime. I was a normal guy at school who was miles and miles away from those who marked themselves as the boss of the school, basically backbenchers of our class. It was a normal day, and I was waiting for my friend in the cafeteria as it was lunchtime. Suddenly, I heard a little commotion straight in the hallway. Several students went running in that direction after listening to the whole commotion, but I stayed there and ignored it as we had frequent verbal and sometimes violent fights at my school, and I was weary of it that it would all be silent in a few minutes after some verbal argument. As far as I could understand from the noise, the fight was over some Instagram chat. My friend came running from the opposite hallway and sat beside me. He knew about all this before. I asked him about the whole matter, and he told me that this fight was a result of a love triangle. A girl was responsible for all this. The two boys were chatting with the same girl on Instagram, and that girl was over smart. She was ditching both of them, and here these fools were beating each other just because of her. Both of them were unaware of the fact that the girl was claiming to be in love with both of them, and here these meatheads were fighting to own her. Till this point, the fight was mostly verbal with some push-ins. I could hear both of them shouting and bickering with each other. All of a sudden, the audience became furious and started shouting. All I could hear was a loud scream. Then the crowd quickly dispersed. Some are in this direction, and the rest are in the opposite. There was a lot of screaming and crying, and within a moment, everything was clear. There was no one left in the hall except a single boy who was lying on the floor and screaming in pain. I wondered what could have happened. My friend who was sitting with me stopped someone and asked why everyone started running all of a sudden. At that moment, we came to know that one of the boys who was arguing suddenly pulled out a knife from his pocket and stabbed the other one and again in his chest. We both were shocked to know that what we were assuming to be a verbal argument turned out to be a violent one. We stood up from the chair and ran to see the scene. We saw the boy lying on the floor, and there were stab wounds on his abdomen area, chest, and near the neck area also. Until we reached there were bloodstains all over his body and the walls also. What I believe was the most horrible was the pool of blood around that boy, which covered the floor as well. We both were scared after watching blood all over there. We knew he was losing too much blood and needed instant help, but it was like we were frozen in that particular spot, and no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't move a foot. Fortunately, some teachers came running for his help and called the ambulance, but till now, he was almost non-responsive. Other than the initial screamings, there was no sound coming from him now. He needed urgent treatment, and it seemed like the ambulance was taking an eternity to arrive. After about half an hour, they finally arrived, and the boy was taken for emergency treatment. Afterward, the cop also came. I think someone from the school must have called them. The boy who did all this was hiding on the terrace, but he was held by the cops for juvenile detention. The next day, I got the news from my friend that the boy who was stabbed died. After 2 months, I went to another town far away to attend college and never listened about that case. As I think about that incident now, it was like a nightmare, like being in the theater and watching a movie where the killer went on a rampage and killed someone.
A few months back, I decided I was pretty much over the breakup I'd had during the summer with my long-term girlfriend. It took me months to be able to get over it, as I was really heartbroken, but at some point you just sort of have to get back on the horse, don't you? So I downloaded that dating app Hinge and started swiping through profiles. It's definitely the best dating app I've come across, as it lets you actually message girls directly instead of just sort of hoping that they're going to see you and match with you. So it definitely gave me a better chance at getting to talk to the kind of girls I'm into, and one of these was a Persian girl named Sarushe. Sarushe was honestly one of the most beautiful girls I'd ever laid eyes on. She had this big mess of wild dark hair that was dip-dyed blonde towards the ends, really high cheekbones, perfectly sculptured eyebrows, and some of the deepest, darkest, most alluring brown eyes I'd ever seen. She was simply stunning, and because she'd grown up in Tehran, the capital of Iran, I had something of an edge. You see, I speak a little bit of Farsi, the language they speak there, and I figured that might impress her if I told her as much, which it did, and boom. Only an hour or so later, I sent her my opener and we were chatting. She was an extremely busy person, and I was flattered when she said that she would make time to see me. So, we arranged to meet for coffee over the weekend. She showed up to our date in her gym gear and apologized for being so underdressed, but could only make it after a scheduled workout with a personal trainer. But I didn't care at all. She looked absolutely smoking hot in her yoga pants. And we were having coffee, just kind of chatting about our lives, our interests, all that first date kind of stuff, when I look out of the big glass windows to see this dude leaning up against his car. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me at first, but after a minute or two I realized that he was just straight up staring at us. At one point, Sarushe noticed me looking over her shoulder and asked what I'm looking at, and I make a comment about the bloke outside who seemed to be proper eyeballing us. She then turns around, looking over her shoulder, then spins back with this terrified look on her face before saying something like, we have to leave, now. I'm all like, why? Do you know that fella? And she denies knowing him, but I'm not a dope. I knew what the score was, like straight away. Either it was a controlling family member or something, or it was a psycho ex-boyfriend. I figured all he'd do was follow us to try and be intimidating or something, but I never imagined he'd actually lay hands on me, and the way that he did it absolutely scared the soil out of me. You see, where I live is built up along this big mile-wide river, and the coffee shop me and Sarushe had chosen to meet at was right on the docks. So we're walking along the city's promenade when the guy cornered me, grabbed me by the throat, and started pushing me backwards so my back was leaning over the rails. I tried to get him off, but this bloke was an absolute unit, and as much as I tried, there was no getting him off of me. And the thing about the river where I live is that it's got a really, really strong current. Like if you fall off of a boat and were over the side of the prom, you can be in serious trouble as the current will suck you under the water, drown you, and then just drag you out into the Irish Sea. So the whole time he's threatening me, telling me to leave Surishay alone, all this big macho masculine stuff. Surishay is smacking him around the head, telling him to get off me, and all the while I'm thinking, if I go over the edge here, I'm a dead man. And I don't think he had any idea of it either. Like it didn't sound like he was from our city, as we have a very particular accent, which he just didn't have. So he was probably thinking he could lash me in the water and embarrass me a wee bit and I'd just be fine, but I'm telling you now, I wouldn't have been, and he'd have been done for manslaughter. But thank God, he didn't throw me over the railings, he just sort of backed off and headed back the way that he'd come after he'd blown off a little bit of steam. I mean, the girl was gorgeous. I don't blame him for being a bit sore after a breakup or jealous of another lad, but Jesus Christ, if he'd been angrier, if he'd have lost his cool, really lost control, I legit wouldn't be here typing this. I'd be floating in the Irish Sea somewhere, maybe washing up as a rotten corpse on the beach in County Cork, all because of some idiot getting a bit jealous. Two nights ago, I was awoken by my dog between 11 and 3 a.m. at most. He kept near me when I finally got up and made a low, aggressive growl facing out of my room, but kept close to me. He's never done this before. I've worked with canines for years. They gave me a gut feeling, and then I heard it. Someone talking. In my dad's yard, no more than 20 feet by the sound. Low mumbling or bad whispering. I was blaring Return of the King, yes, the extended version. I need to add that I have childlike hearing, for my age, for context. If you speak in one floor home with 2 doors closed at a whisper, I can make out the words. He went quiet when I opened a drawer too loud to grab my .38 special, chambered around and noticed a shadow passing by a light outside the blurred window. Home was clear, all doors locked. Nothing odd, but my dog peeled out. I held my flashlight in one hand, went his way and called him to the other side. He was gone. I guess they knew I was home and ran on foot. I went around but thought, okay, I'm good. Well, Florida continues to be Florida. Night 3. My dog does this again in the same frame, waking me up, and at this rate, I just got the 12 gauge. My dog was acting far more protective and gave me the dog body language for major threat, need the pack, can't handle alone. I froze for a moment. 2 people now? This is not good. They must intend to violently take whatever they could be after. It was one new guy and guy 1 from yesterday. I can't risk getting a look. At this rate, they mean business and had to be armed to scope out a place with a Ring camera, 60 pounds of muscle dog, and my grown self with a lifetime of handling weaponry. In the yard around 2:30 a.m. for a second night, they knew I and my dog were home but clearly had a goal. This time, voices were behind the home. My dog then pulled a freaking Leroy Jenkins. He gave one of the most aggressive, loud barks I'd ever heard of any dog do and ran to the wall. I ran to his side, getting him hyped up, yelling, "Mess them up, they're dead men." Now things are clicking for me. This was planned and professional. I checked every inch of the property with the shotgun. My dog was worked up and spooked, but calming to be with. I'm buying a mistake for this one, and a good one. I went inside. I literally kept that gun on me and chambered and in reach of my bed, and I barely slept. Day 4. I did a bit of looking around for misplaced or slightly moved objects or scratched up locks. Yep. One trash can by the gate was rotated 180 degrees, with the handle facing me and not the wall as it always been placed. A few crushed dead twigs as I went back. The head chair was turned to move to the right. A clearly odd thing is that table is set symmetrically, so it's glaringly obviously out of place if you live there. The Ring camera system and my neighbors so far show nothing, but I knew these guys had to have known that my dad was gone. They knew his son lives there, that the dog would eat them and is huge, that I had a gun, and I even announced that it was armed. yet they came back with backup. Then the dude came back up, moved stuff I didn't know till my maritime buddy told me to check if such and such a rock was out of place. It's a way to gauge the person's awareness and presence, I guess. Whatever their goal was, I don't care. I just want them to know if they come back again, I'll be strapped to the gills.
For decades now, those huddled around their campfires on dark Virginia nights have shared a tale that has made their companions blood run cold. Is the story of an escaped insane asylum patient, a man committed for the cold-blooded murder of his own family on Easter Sunday. Following his incarceration, he became obsessed with Easter-modified motifs, eggs, crucifixes, and most importantly, rabbits. Because following his freak escape from the psychiatric hospital, he was interred at our family killer escape into the woods around Colchester Overpass near Clifton, Virginia, where he found his only stable resource of food was rabbit meat. Over time, the escaped mental patient collected the skins of the rabbit he killed, somehow stitching them together in something that resembled a huge gore-stained rabbit costume. Anyone unlucky enough to stray into his patch of the woods found themselves subjected to the terrifying ordeal of being chased to the trees by an axe-wielding fursuited psychopath that soon came to be known as the Bunny Man. But despite the fact that the Bunny Man sounds like nothing but bone-chilling urban legend, the terrifying reality is there's much more truth than the story than we'd like to admit. Clifton wasn't always the vibrant suburban sprawl that it is now. At the beginning of the 20th century, it was a small and humble farming community centered around the towns of the railway station. But as Clifton grew and its population swelled, the residents became unhappy that they were so close to a state insane asylum. The solution was simple. The local government passed a measure to shut the asylum down, and the inmates being temporarily housed in the newly built Lorton prison. However, during transport, one inmate managed to wrestle free from prison guards and escape into some nearby woodland. The prisoner's name was Douglas Griffin. In a matter of record that a man by the name was convicted of murder by his own parents with an axe on Easter morning when he was just 12 years old. And his hearing, young Douglas seemed manic and deranged, completely absorbed by the Easter imagery present in his home on the day he killed his own mother and father. A judge spared no time and committed him to an insane asylum, and that's where he lived for 20 long years, right up until the day of his escape. Federal marshal, local law enforcement, and a handful of volunteers searched the woods near the site of Griffin's escape for months on end, using sniffer dogs, professional trackers, and even mounted patrols. But the only traces they found the FEM were the mutilated corpses of several half-eaten rabbits. By October of that year, Douglas Griffin was assumed dead, with law enforcement refusing to believe that he could have survived out in the woods for that long. But after 3 teenagers went missing, the search for them brought police officers right back to the very same area they've been hunting Douglas Griffin. And then one night, bloodhounds looking for the kids led officers to a small bridge with a rail line at the top and a road running under the bridge. Hanging from the bridge were the missing teens' decision bowed like the rabbits in the woods. The teens had apparently been walking home and had stumbled across Griffin hiding under the bridge. Moments after making the gruesome discovery, police officers heard a maniacal laughter coming from above them. Looking up to see a man in a rabbit's firm mask waving an axe above his head. Police then claimed that Griffin was hit by an oncoming train, although whether or not that's true or just an excuse for their failure to capture him, it's impossible to discern. But that didn't stop local newspapers from pumping out stories detailing the grisly deeds of the Bunny Man of Clifton. As far as I can tell, the Bunny Man legend appears to have started in the 1970s, but has its roots in unrelated real-life events. On the night of October 8, 1970, Air Force Cadet Robert Bennett and his fiancée were driving near Colchester Bridge when Robert spotted something in the middle of the road that had him slamming on his brakes to avoid hitting it. There was a man, and what appeared to be a full-bodied gray suit on there was completely, with as Robert put it, something that looked a lot like bunny ears. The couple simply stared at the figure, dumbstruck, until they noticed the large hatchet in his hand, at which point they drove off again at high speed. Though neither Robert nor his fiancée were hurt, they were shaken by the incident and couldn't provide a lot of details. But with his pale outfits and ear-like head covering, Benetton police initially speculated that the man was a member of the KKK. The mysterious figure was quickly dubbed the Bunny Man by local newspapers, and it wasn't long before there was a second sighting. Less than 2 weeks later, a construction site security guard making his rounds in a new housing development caught the Bunny Man using an axe to smash the roof supports of new houses being built. After the newspaper ran the story, the Bunny Man called the local authorities, saying that he was against the spread of new housing divisions into his woods. Based on his voice and eyewitness accounts, police determined the Bunny Man was a local teen upset with the new housing development. He told police that he would meet them at the Colchester Bridge on Halloween, but never showed it was never seen again. The events were reported in the newspaper around the country, and teens from all over Virginia started to make their way to Colchester Bridge to look for the Bunny Man. Over 50 Bunny Man sightings were reported everywhere, from Maryland to Washington, D.C., though not a single sighting could be corroborated. The supernatural elements of the Bunny Man story only came when locals connected the Bunny Man news reports to an unsolved murder of a local girl that happened in 1918. 14-year-old Eva Roy was found beaten to death and hung near Colchester Bridge, and the prime suspect was an escaped mental patient who broke out of Lorton Prison, though he was eventually proved innocent of the crime. As years passed, the legend spread. Teens near the bridge would go on Bunny Man hunts in the woods, especially near Halloween. It seems horrifying that such a ridiculous-sounding story can have so many elements of truth to it. Just makes you wonder, how many other stories, myths, or legend that we're so quick to dismiss as false are actually based on terrifying, real-life events?
I think I might be cheating with this one, because it's not even my story. There are no ghosts in it, no one gets shot or creeped on, but it's still one of the realest, scariest things I'd ever heard. So my brother is at this house/birthday party where literally everyone is underage drinking. The party is on one of those cul-de-sac things, like a dead-end street, but pretty. And what's also pretty frightening is that a buttload of people actually drove to the party and were planning on driving home. The house they were at had a thin driveway, so all the cars were packed into a bottleneck. The night wore on, and around 1 a.m, someone decided that they wanted to go home. They found the girl who owned the car at the front of the bottleneck and asked her to move her car so she could get out. She said she couldn't because she had a breathalyzer installed in her car and it wouldn't start until someone sober blew into it. They went around the party to try to find anyone who hadn't been drinking and couldn't find one. Another guy had the brilliant idea of asking the cool 20-something dude next door to do it. So an envoy of teens head over to the house next door and asked the dude living there if he could please blow into a breathalyzer so they could leave. The dude takes a minute to look the group over, takes a drag of his cigarette and says, "You're gonna give me $25 for every person at that party, or I'm calling the cops." The way my brother tells it, they actually thought the guy was joking, and a bunch of them just laugh it off before being like, "No, really, help us out with this." But the guy was deadly serious, and reappears at the door moments later with his cordless phone, showing that he's ready to call the cops if they don't cough up the money. That dude must have gouged hundreds of dollars from them that night, as they were straight up terrified of getting caught drinking, especially the girl with the breathalyzer thing installed in the car. I get that he was doing something wrong, but the whole reaching out to a stranger for help, and that's the way they act. Like he could have just told them to get lost and call the cops anyway, but his first thought is, how can I make this work for me? Probably the worst birthday party my brother had ever been to. It seriously sucks that people like that exist.
If I said to you, Madeline, Colombia, what do you think of? Pre-2015, only a handful of people would have given the answer that is commonplace today. But since that narco show was on TV, almost everyone knows what Madeline is famous for. And that's for being the home of the Madeline cartel, added up by the one and only Pablo Escobar. These days, the Madeline cartel are confined to the history books, but the legacy of violence lives on in the city, and the problems didn't exactly die along with Escobar when the law caught up with him in '93. So it's there, in the city of Madeline, that I met a girl named Stephanie while I was traveling around South America. Steph was from Canada on a similar sort of rolling vacation as I was, and there was this almost instant chemistry between us that ended with me asking her out. We drank cheap Colombian beers, compared traveling tattoos. She definitely won with her traditional tippy-tap Filipino tribal piece, and generally just had ourselves a great time. But when it came to the end of the night, we were put in a rather precarious situation. You see, that old legacy of violence and suspicion means that in a city like Madeline, you can't get anywhere without the right credentials. And as a result, neither of us were allowed any guests in our respective hostels. So we thought on our feet and decided the night was warm enough for us to spend it in one of Madeline's public parks. So we spot what seemed like a nice enough place to lay down. Only as we're walking over, we see these 4 Colombian guys hanging out on a bench. No reason to be suspicious, right? I mean, it was a nice enough night, and the South American idea of a late night is totally different to ours, so not everyone hanging out past midnight is some kind of reprobate. I suppose that goes for the States too, but I digress. So me and Steph are sitting there for a few minutes when one of the guys from the bench comes over to talk to us. My Spanish is still an embarrassingly dire at that time, but I knew enough to know that he was asking for a cigarette. I told him, I don't smoke. No fumo, lo siento. But he carried on asking for stuff like money, then other things with words I didn't understand. I kept saying, lo siento, tengo nada. But he just won't give it up. He kept talking to us, then spits out something mean-sounding in Steph's direction. So at that point, I really take issue, and I have enough Dutch courage to tell him to get F before I leave Steph off to another spot further away from them. I'll spare you the finer details of what followed, but needless to say, Steph and I ended up having a little cuddle, shall we say, until we heard and saw something that almost scared us half to death. A police siren and flashing lights, and it was just a few feet away near the boundary of the parkland. Steph quickly pulled her dress back on, and we attempted to make ourselves as presentable as possible as the cop car screeches to a halt. 2 guys jump out, and they come jogging over to us. How they knew we were there, I don't know, but I figured the guy asking for smokes had called them and has a kind of screw you for not being generous to us. I'm on the verge of a full-on freakout, as all I can think is, I'm gonna end up in a Colombian jail, and that's gonna be the end of it for me. Colombia has some of the worst prisons in all of South America, and to no offense to our Latin cousins, but that's really saying something. What's worse, I didn't have the money to pay a fine or a bribe, so there was absolutely zero chance of me talking my way out of it. But still, I didn't really have a choice. The best I could hope for was to pull off a speech skill 100. So I got down to it. As this little Colombian cop, I don't even say that to be mean, the guy was literally no smaller than 5'4", is shining his flashlight in my face. I'm just pouring this stream of bilingual apologetic consciousness that probably sounded something like, dude, lo siento, seriously, no borrachos. Han cansado, just tired, I'm sorry, I swear to God. What all the cop does is scold us in Spanish, talking so fast that I can barely understand a word. Steph is like welling up with tears at this point, as she's too obviously thinks she's about to be arrested. All I could do was shut up and let the cop burn off whatever angry energy he had, and just pray he didn't drag us both off to jail there and then. I just hit him with, "Lo siento, no entiendo," until he finally kinda calms down and pulls a smartphone out of his police vest thing. When I see he's pulling up Google Translate, I know something isn't quite right. If he really was just going to throw the cuffs on us, he'd have done it already, right? So what are we about to type out? I'd never forget what came next and how I foolishly tried to anticipate his words without stopping to consider the context. First thing he typed was translated, "These men," and pointed over to where the cigarette guy and his friends had been. I look over expecting to see them looking all smug, but there's no one there. And it dawns on me that they'd beat feet as soon as they'd seen the cops arrive. I go to say something like, "Yeah, I know, they called you, I'm sorry." But the cop cuts me off with a little sock puppet hand gesture, clamping the thing's mouth shut as if to stay quiet. So I do as I'm told and carry on watching him type. "These men," he continued, "are very dangerous. You must leave now or they will come back." And the cop stopped for a second, like he was trying to find the right words, then wrote, "They will come back and violate the girl. Understand?" My chin is dusting the floor at this point. Like I had no idea we were in that much danger. And right before I can say anything, the guy types, "They are known to us. They have done things before. They will do things again." Again, we just nod, too stunned by how dumb we'd been to really be relieved that we weren't in any trouble. The cop then types out, "Don't come back here during the night again," shows us the message, then escorts us to the well-lit street nearby. As you can imagine, that whole thing really killed the mood, and even though I walked Steph back to her hostel, there was never any talk of me getting inside to continue where we left off. I saw her a few more times before she moved on to Argentina, and yes, we did conclude some of the unfinished business, even kept in touch for a while after I returned to the US. But you can bet your bottom dollar I didn't go anywhere near any poorly lit places in Madeline, not for the remainder of my stay. I learned my lesson, and I learned it good.
These are two accounts of the most scared I have ever been. Both happened while I was stationed in Afghanistan. The first happened in late 2011 in a place called Helmand Province, Afghanistan. I was standing posts on a small 8-man patrol base at about 2 a.m. in the morning. The posts consisted of 4 plywood walls, bulletproof glass, and multiple sandbags. I have been up for about 24 hours at this point and was starting to hallucinate through my NVGs. Mildly seeing school buses and the like, when all of a sudden, bang. I first thought it was a round, hitting the bulletproof glass. I realized about a second later that it was a rock. Immediately on high alert, adrenaline flowing, I scan the area with my thermals and get no heat signatures from anywhere. The strange part was that we had double-stacked razor wire about 30 meters out from the post, and it was all open ground for about 30 meters past that. So any rock thrown would have had to have been amazing. I caught up to the center of command and had them use a big thermal camera on a stick to scan the area in case I missed something. They got nothing. At this point, I'm kind of freaking out, thinking that there's someone out there that I can't see, but they can see me. 10 or 15 minutes go by, and I'm starting to relax a little bit, thinking maybe a bird flew into the glass or something like that. When all of a sudden, bang. Now this time, it sounded 2 times louder. I get a feeling of pure terror and feel adrenaline flush through my whole body. I've got my rifle at the ready, PEQ laser on, looking harder than I've ever looked before. Every piece of micro-terrain that a human could be hiding behind. And still, I couldn't see anything. I freaked out, but nothing happens for the rest of the post. I still do not know to this day what it was, but it scared the life out of me. I'm thinking it might have been some form of hallucination, but it felt way too real. I know that probably doesn't make sense, but it just kind of didn't feel like something my brain was making up. Now, the second story happened in early 2012. We were still in Helmand Province, but a different, bigger patrol base. 13 men plus Afghan National Army platoon. It was around midnight on this post. The patrol base had gravel lining the whole grounds to keep dust down. It was a poorly built defensive position with blind spots everywhere. I was a little over 6 hours into an 8-hour shift when I heard some gravel crunching just below my post, which is about 10 feet back from inside the wire, i.e. the blind spot. Very unusual because we had an early A in patrol, and everyone but myself, the other post standard, and the one guy on radio watching the command center were sleeping. I call out, "Who's that?" And the crunching stops, and I get no response. I use my radio to call the command center and ask if he was walking about. He tells me no, so I asked him to come check this out, and make sure to tell him to be careful coming around the corner, and have him keep his rifle up, weapon light on, and pop the corner. As I see him walking out of the COC, the gravel crunching sounds pick up again. But this time, rapidly, like someone was running. Once again, high alert adrenaline flowing hardcore. I'm thinking we've got someone inside the wires, so I start yelling stop or I'll shoot in Afghan. The sound stops, and my radial watch pops the corner, ready to shoot, and nothing. There was just nothing there. So, once again, I freaked out. He chalks it up to me being paranoid and lacking sleep, but I'm not so sure. About an hour later, it happens again almost exactly the same way, with nothing being there once more. I have the radio watch and wake up my buddy, and he stands on post with me for the last hour, which passes without incident. I still have no clue what it was. Was it a kid inside the wire somehow? A cat? A dog? A ghost? Who knows? All I know is I have never been more scared than I was during those 2 incidents.
In 1979, Irish new wave band the Boomtown Rats released a song called I Don't Like Mondays. Penned by Bob Geldof, a man perhaps more famous for his charitable musical events, the chorus consists of just 2 lines, I don't like Mondays, and I want to shoot the whole day down. So on first listen you might be forgiven for thinking the song is nothing more than an innocent Garfield-esque skewering of the worst day of the week. But let's take a look at the song's opening few lines. The silicon chip inside her head gets switched to overload, and nobody's gonna go to school today. She's gonna make them stay at home. Starting to sound a little ominous, right? Who is this person whose brain has gone into overload, and how is she going to stop people from attending school? The answer to the many menacing questions provoked by an Irish art punk song actually lie thousands of miles away in San Diego, California. where a young girl named Brenda Spencer lived. In early 1979, Brenda was just 16 years old and was living in the San Carlos neighborhood of San Diego. She was around 5'2", with bright red hair, and was living with her single-parent father, Wallace. But life in the family home was far from pleasant, and Wallace was an extremely heavy drinker. As a result, holding onto a job was hard, and poverty meant that both father and daughter were forced to sleep on a single mattress on the living room floor, surrounded by the detritus of Wallace's addiction. Neighbors said the couple weren't particularly friendly, but neither were they particularly hostile. The only time they'd ever seen any trouble over the Spencer's place was when a police officer knocked on the door to make a harmless inquiry. Wallace had just about exploded on the stunned police officer, demanding to see a warrant, then expelling him from his property when he couldn't produce one. When a neighbor gently challenged Wallace on his behavior, he doubled down, saying the cop was lucky that he hadn't shot him off the porch with his sawed-off shotgun. In school, Brenda showed obvious signs of intelligence, in particular a talent for photography. But her general disinterest in the rigor and routine of formal education soon led to chronic absence, and in the end, she was transferred to a specialist school for problem students. It was basically a remedial school, and Brenda says she remembers how depressing it was to be treated like she was stupid, rather than someone who simply didn't like going to school. However, it was at this new school that experts realized that Brenda's issues might be deeper than mere behavioral problems, and a brain scan showed that she had an acute injury to the temporal lobe of her brain. This was blamed on a bicycle accident during her childhood, with Wallace remembering that he'd made an interesting observation following the incident. He figured the whole thing might put her off riding her bike, but the polar opposite occurred. Brenda seemed unafraid, more impulsive even, willing to take risks, riding faster, jumping higher. The summer following her first year at the specialist school was a nightmare for Brenda's father. She seemed to have inherited her father's obsessive distrust of authority, as well as his interest in firearms, and it was clear to all around her that Brenda had stored up a huge amount of malice and contempt whilst interred at the specialist school, negative energy she'd then brought right back home with her. She began to hunt birds around the neighborhood, viciously executing any and all she could see, until one day she came home in a cop car with the officer telling Wallace that Brenda had been caught shooting out the windows of Grover Elementary School, which was just across the street. She managed to get off with just a slap on the wrist, but the psychiatrist at her specialist school recommended she be admitted to a mental hospital on the ground that she was a danger to herself and others. However, Wallace vehemently objected, citing the poor reaction she was already having with the new school. The holidays followed shortly after, with Brenda asking her father for a wireless radio set for her bedroom. But instead of a radio, Wallace opted for a shockingly irresponsible gift in its place. Instead of taking her BB gun away, he gave her an upgrade in the form of a Ruger 10/22 semi-automatic rifle with a telescopic sight and 500 rounds of ammunition. Brenda was now a ticking time bomb, armed and dangerous, and it wasn't long before she'd fatally explode. On the morning of January 29, 1979, the children of Grover Cleveland Elementary School began to line up outside the gates, waiting for 59-year-old Principal Burton Ragg to open the gates up. It was a Monday, one of the first of the year, and despite the unusually chilly temperatures, it remained a peaceful, picturesque California morning. Yet just moments later, that same peace was to be abruptly shattered by the bark of a Ruger 10/22. Because Brenda Spencer had awoken that morning in a particularly foul mood, one that seems to have been exacerbated by the sight of those innocent young school children lining up for one of the first school days of the new year. Perhaps it was a longing to return to that same normality, a sadness that boiled up in contempt as she watched those children engage in something she might never again experience. But in the end, she would give a far different reason as to why she grabbed a rifle that morning, all before setting up in a second-floor window of her childhood home, aiming and opening fire. With the first crack of the rifle, The first child fell. Mr. Ragg, the school principal, spun around in terrified confusion, trying to figure out what was going on. Then another crack was heard, and yet another child fell. Mr. Ragg tried desperately to get the children behind some kind of hard cover, but it was no good. They were hurtling around in a horrified panic, gifting Brenda one perfect kill shot after another. Ragg managed to get a number of the children to safety, but dozens were still running around the street outside, screaming and crying. As he ran out to try to get the remainder to safety, Brenda Spencer saw him, and she understood what he was trying to do. In a split second, she aimed, fired, and Mr. Ragg fell dead in the street. It was then 56-year-old school custodian Mike Suker's turn to try to rescue the children. But as he too ran into the street and attempted to drag one of the wounded children to safety, Brenda once again took aim and executed the selfless, courageous man where he stood. Not even the police were safe from Brenda's marksmanship, and the first responding officer was shot in the neck as he exited his patrol car. Although mortally wounded, he was able to relay the shooter's position to his fellow officers, and soon, Brenda's line of sight was blocked off by a garbage truck that police drove in front of her house. What followed was a tense standoff between the San Diego Police Department and a 16-year-old girl. Police negotiators managed to establish communication with her, but after hours, they heard nothing but how Brenda wanted to come out shooting, and how the children she had killed were easy targets, and that she only wished she'd killed more of them. Meanwhile, a newspaper reporter from the local San Diego Union Tribune had been calling random numbers in the neighborhood, hoping to talk to anyone who had been witness to the slaughter. And by complete chance, one of the numbers he called was none other than the Spencer residence. Apparently, Brenda answered the phone believing it was the negotiators calling again, and unleashed a torrent of curse words as she picked up the phone. There was a chilling moment for the reporter as he realized exactly who he was talking to, and said his blood ran cold when the girl confirmed that it was her who had been doing the shooting that morning. The reporter, after asking a few preliminary questions to confirm who she was, then asked her why she had chosen to take the lives of all those innocent children. The words of Brenda Spencer's answer to that question would pass into legend. "Because I don't like Mondays," she said. This livened up the day. In the end, Brenda didn't come out shooting as she promised she would. Eventually, she got hungry and reportedly surrendered once the authorities promised that they would take her to Burger King. Officers found empty beer and whiskey bottles all over the house, but reported that Brenda was not intoxicated at the time of the killings. The following year, just a day after her 18th birthday, Brenda was sentenced to 25 years to life at the California Institution for Women in Chino. At a parole hearing in the year of 2005, the deputy district attorney cited ongoing incidents of self-harm as showing that she was psychotic and unfit to be released. This self-harm came in the form of scratching the words alone and unforgiven into her own flesh, and it meant it would be another 10 years before she would face another parole board. As of June of 2021, Brenda remains incarcerated at the CIW in Chino and is set for another parole hearing in September. This means that by this time next year, Brenda Spencer might once again be free to walk the streets of San Diego. And if that is the case, it might be a good idea to be extra polite to any middle-aged redheads you might meet on a Monday morning. Because as much as no one likes Mondays, some evidently dislike them a great deal more than others.
Before I even get to my story, I want to emphasize the point of me writing this. There was more than enough blame for what happened to go around for all of us. The decision was ours to cut corners. Trusting our mother's home to a stranger was stupid. No one denies that. However, the events that unfolded as a result were 100% not our fault. We did everything society tells us to do. The police were called, and their job was to protect my sister. They failed in their job. This is on their hands. My number one aim is to impress upon you to know that it's important to fully vet any individual before allowing them to access your home. The following story is written to drive home this very important point. At the end of 2019, just before Christmas in fact, my mother passed away from a long-term illness. So I was already married and set up a home on my own. My mother left her home to my younger sister, Emily. Emily had been renting up until this time. Release was just ended, so she moved in until she was sure of what she was going to do with it. She knew she had my support. Regardless of her decision, my wife and I threw her a surprise housewarming party for her. At the party, one of Emily's coworkers gave her a kitten as a gift. She was unable to have any pets in her apartment. It was love at first sight. The weeks after the party were life as usual for all of us. Emily managed to litter train the kitten, and all was going well. Just before Valentine's Day, Emily's employer notified her of a business conference she was required to attend. It was part of her job, and this will be a first trip since she had moved into the new house. Normally, this will be simple, but now with the kitten, things were a tad more complicated. My family was unable to watch the kitten because of my daughter's allergies. Kenneling was briefly considered until the price was found to be too great. Besides, she didn't like the idea of her precious little angel being locked up for 3 days. She chose to search on Craigslist for house sitters. An earlier call to a service proved too high. Also, she found this young girl around 19 who claimed to be an independent house sitter. They spoke first on the phone, then met at the house so she could look around. The girl seemed kind and professional. After agreeing on an amount, the deal was set. 2 weeks later, Emily kissed her kid goodbye and left her trip. She checked in the first night, and all sounds like it was going well. 2 days later, she returned to a nightmare. The clean, beautiful home she had left was now scattered with clothes and dirty dishes. When she confronted the girl got mad and said she wasn't a maid. Things only got worse from there. My sister was horrified to see that the litter box was full, and the kitten had already begun going on the floor. Certainly not the poor cat's fault. And this infuriated my sister, and she refused to pay the girl. An argument broke out, and the police were eventually called. They really couldn't do much other than force the girl to leave the property, but the girl was furious. She vowed she'd get back at my sister as she left. This was all set in front of the police, but they obviously didn't take that threat seriously. The officer went on their way, and my sister began cleaning up the mess inside. A few days passed, and Emily tried to put the experience behind her. That Friday, soon after returning from work, a man rang the doorbell and asked for her. She identified herself, and the man began demanding the money owed to the young girl. My sister calmly explained the situation, but the only grew more aggressive. Although she was now terrified, she held her ground and refused. This was when the man backhanded her. She fell back and hit her head on the floor. Unfortunately, it wasn't done. He approached her and demanded the money again. My sister, who was clearly concussed, didn't answer, so he punched her unconscious. Apparently, while she was out, he entered the house and stole all the cash from her purse. But the time she had awakened, he was gone.
It took her several minutes to crawl to her phone and call 911. They arrived soon after, and she was rushed to the hospital. I'm happy to say that there's no long-term physical injuries, but mentally, Emily was a mess, and still is, honestly, to be frank. And I know the identity of the man in his location and would have killed him. Fortunately, I regained my senses and agreed to leave it in the authorities' hands, despite their inability to prevent it. The responsible parties were found and arrested within a couple of days. It wasn't some great mystery after all. The man who assaulted Emily was an ex-boyfriend of the young girl. She had promised him half of the money to retrieve it. The young girl claimed she never or intended anyone to be hurt. But her threat in front of witnesses, cops at that, sealed her fate. She managed to get away with probation because she had no priors, or acts, on the other hand, had a long record. He was given 3 years. But once the COVID crisis began, he was released early. The entire family was less than happy to hear of the lenient sentences. But criminals getting off easy is now new under the sun of these days. In the months since the attack, everyone has done their most to be there for Emily. Her recovery is going well, and she seems to be responding to therapy. The lockdowns approved the blessing for her. She'd been able to heal at a much slower and calm pace. Until restrictions are lifted completely, she'd been approved to work from home. Or little furry friend has served as a priceless companion for her during these terrible times. Although some may say he was the cause of this whole awful mess. Uncle glad he's been around to keep her company.
This story is told from a female perspective. It happened to me a couple of months ago. I was on a dating app called Tinder. I matched with this one guy that I found attractive. He had a clean-shaven head and was more appealing compared to the other guys on the app. His profile said he was the same age as me, 25. The bio in his profile was intriguing. It read, "I am the most versatile person you will ever meet. I compare myself to a chameleon because I like to be different and spontaneous, randomly. You should join me." This made me compelled to chat with him. He then sends me a direct message saying, "Hi, I'm Dennis." I sent him a message back introducing myself and asked him what brings him on Tinder. He responds by saying, "Want to have dinner at my place tonight?" Ignoring the fact that I just asked him a question. Without hesitation, I message, "Sure." I usually wouldn't be so forward with someone I just met online, but something seemed compelling about this guy. He then sent me his address and mentioned that he'll be inviting a few friends. I messaged him back saying, "Okay," and waited till then. Later that night, I drove to his address and arrived at his front door. As soon as I'm about to knock on the front door, it opens, with Dennis staring dead at me. He had a blank expression on his face and didn't say a word. I found this very, very bizarre and creepy. About 10 seconds later, he says hi, then leans over to give me a hug. He tells me to come inside and I stupidly go inside. As we arrive inside, I sit on the couch and Dennis immediately asks me if I want anything to drink. I tell him water, please. He then tells me that Patricia only drinks tea. I was confused by who he was referring to. I asked him who Patricia was. He then tells me that she is one of his friends that he invited over. I tell him okay. Then he proceeds to get me some tea in his kitchen. A couple of minutes pass and the most bizarre thing happens. Dennis comes out of the kitchen with 2 cups of tea, dressed as an adolescent child. He wore a yellow hoodie and blue track pants. The clothes honestly looked like it belonged to a teenage boy. He places the 2 cups of tea on the table and reintroduces himself again, saying his name is Hedwig, in a creepy child's voice. I found this really disturbing and assumed that this was some sort of sick joke. I awkwardly put on a fake smile and go along with the alleged joke. At this point, he tells me, "Drink the tea," again in a disturbing child's voice. I really didn't want to, and knew I had to get the hell out of there. So I cleverly say, don't we have to wait for your friend Patricia? He got angry and said that if I don't drink it, he will release the beast. He honestly sounded like the type of a child that throws tantrums when their parents don't buy them things that they want. I was trembling in fear and didn't know if he was armed or had a knife on him, so I drank it. The room suddenly started becoming blurry, and I eventually started fading, then blacked out. I assume it was from whatever he put in the tea. I then remember waking up on the floor and seeing a woman standing in front of me. The woman was wearing burgundy. Looks like a burgundy long sleeve shirt, black skirt, and some heels. I eventually get up from the floor and rub my eyes to see that the woman was Dennis, dressed as a female. I remember thinking to myself, this guy is a psycho. He then said, I'm Patricia. Would you like to have a tea party with me? In a female-like voice. I thought to myself, this guy is so fucked up. I acted fast and told him, I'll be interested in a tea party only if you invited Hedwig back, which was the teenage boy he imitated earlier. Surprisingly, he obliged and walked back into the kitchen to supposedly get Hedwig. I immediately used this opportunity to haul ass out of there and drive home. It's been a month since the incident occurred. I haven't taken effort to report it to the police. I don't know if that was the smartest decision, but as I tell you this story, it still resonates with me until this day. Release the beast. Release the beast.
I'm a 25-year-old male. This happened to me back in 2012. I was pretty oblivious to a lot of things at that age, and always tended to give people the benefit of the doubt, which I do much less nowadays. So I was having trouble finding direction after graduation from college, jumping from job to job, and getting more and more discontent with how my life was going when I came across a post on a popular social media site that was advertising that they were looking for young people to do seasonal work in the U.S. I had nothing to lose, I thought, and the money to be made sounded promising. It would be an opportunity also to have an adventure. So I contacted them and got the process going, but was still unsure of taking that step. My current boss was self-centered. One morning, soon after we'd had a particularly bad falling out, which resulted in me calling him a lot of four-letter expletives, and walking off the job, literally tearing my uniform shirt off and throwing it on the floor. That was the sign I needed to jump at the opportunity to go on the trip I'd planned. I got the job offer from a farmer in rural central northern Idaho within the week. And about 3 weeks later, I was on a plane to Salt Lake City. Then I was on a 7-hour-plus bus trip to the farm. After a few hiccups, a delayed flight, and a bit of stress, I finally got there. The 8 months went by flawlessly, and I had an amazing time. I had a great employer, was making lots of friends, and was able to see so many awesome sights. However, this event started to unfold about 2 weeks before I was due to return to my home country in late November. Temperatures were below freezing already on most days, and snow was sticking to the ground. I arrived home on a Friday evening at about midnight after watching movies at a friend's place. I was a pretty serious night owl at that age and could function on 3 to 4 hours of sleep for months on end without problems. I called my parents around that time too, because of the time difference, so it was around midday back home. I talked for about an hour or so with them until we hung up. When I did, I had a vehicle drive up our shared driveway. So the layout of our apartment block was as follows: 2 blocks of 4 units each, 2 on the ground floor, and 2 on the first floor. So 8 in total. We had a shared driveway with all units facing it, and 1 parking space for each unit next to each other right in front of the bottom unit. I lived in number 4, which was the right-hand side top unit in the first block. And the crate this story is about lives in the 6th, which was the bottom right-hand unit in the second block, and his name is Corey. The way my unit was laid out, I would have a full view of the whole driveway and all car parking spaces into the street. Unfortunately, there was very little light in the parking areas as the street lights didn't reach down the driveway. But now back to my story. I peeked out of my front window and saw it was the guy from number 6 coming home, as I recognized his truck and him, as well as his stocky build beard and shaved head. I could hear he was mad and probably drunk because he was bellowing some nonsense and shouting something towards his girlfriend who was getting out of the passenger side. He started kicking and punching some of the vehicles in the parking area, knocking the window out of an F-150 and breaking down the railing from the stairs leading to the second floor units. He went on like this for about 15 minutes with his vandalism and violent outbursts before his girlfriend herded him inside and it became quiet. Nothing else happened that night, so I got into bed as I had to work the next morning. When I got home about 5 p.m. that Saturday evening, there was a police cruiser in the driveway. I went up to my unit, and a while later there was a knock on my door. I opened it up, and it was the officers. They asked if I'd seen anything the previous night with regards to the property damage outside. Now, my normal consensus would be to stay out of anything that doesn't affect me personally. But I didn't want to lie to the police in a foreign country and risk getting in trouble myself. So I gave a vague and short description of what I'd witnessed, making sure not to directly point to the guy in number 6. I just said it was a guy with a shaved head. Then they thanked me and went on their way. The following Tuesday morning, I got a loud knocking on my door again. As I peeked out of the front window, I saw the guy from number 6, Quarry, pacing on my porch and shouting to open up as he knew I was inside. I became cold, immediately thinking, uh-oh, now I'm going to get beaten up. Then about 5 minutes later, my employer pulled up and the guy stormed off. I got to work feeling terrified the whole day. I considered contacting the police officer that took my statement, but decided against it as I didn't want to cause any more trouble. I got home pretty late that evening. A little while later, I saw Corey's girlfriend walk over and knock on my door. I opened up and she asked if she could have a chat. I said sure and stepped outside, where she explained that he was on probation, so any incidents would cause him to go back to jail. I said to her that he shouldn't have acted out and vandalized people's property then. After a bit of back and forth between us, I gave her a copy of the statement I had, showing that I hadn't implied him directly, only giving a general description, saying it was dark and I couldn't see much, and that put her a bit at ease. I told her I would retract the statement and said I was sleepy and unsure of what I saw, so he would stay away from me. She said she would talk to him. A couple of hours later, I get another knock on my door, and it was the girlfriend again. Corey stood at the bottom of the stairs. She said he wanted to apologize. I went outside and saw my neighbor on his porch. I felt pretty apprehensive now, as this was the first time I'd laid eyes on the guy. He was big, about 6 feet and 250 pounds. He was a bodybuilder type with swastika tattoos on the visible parts of his arm. I shook his hand and we had a lighthearted conversation on my porch, with him apologizing. He offered me his cell number and took mine, saying if I ever wanted to hang out, I should text him. I thanked him and they walked off. I decided to never contact him, as I don't like associating with extremists. Fast forward to Friday, when I only work half a day. As I got back to my apartment, Corey and his girlfriend drove in. We greeted each other, and they invited me to go out with them for dinner. I declined, but they insisted, so I eventually gave in and agreed. They said we could all drive together, so I met up at 3, but it was only him. He said his girlfriend didn't feel well, so I got in his truck and we drove down to the local Mexican restaurant. Initially, we had a good conversation, but then it started to die down. We finished eating, paid, and walked out. I wanted to walk the 3/4 mile home, but he insisted I get in a truck with him as we were both going the same way. I felt uneasy about it, but I got in and we drove out of the parking lot. but he turned the opposite way of going home. I asked him where were we going, and he said he wanted to show me something. I asked what it was, and he said it was always where they went snowboarding when they were in school. All this was said in a monotone voice without making eye contact, which made me feel more uneasy, even teetering towards being scared. Now, I'm not a small guy at 6'2" and about 220 pounds, but I physically have no chance against Corey. We drove out of town and toward the mountains when he drove off the asphalt road and onto a gravel one that led up into the mountains. I became more freaked out. After about a 30 to 40 minute drive, he stopped in the middle of the road. It was starting to get dark out now, and I hadn't had cell service for the past 20 minutes. He got out and took out a hunting rifle from behind the seat and then said something for the first time since we left dinner, except for answering my questions about where we were going. In that same monotone voice, without making eye contact, he said, "Now we go hunting." I was terrified at that point and said I would wait for him in a truck. But he looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw his eyes. They were dark dial, I did, and I could see the hate deep within them. He barked, "Get out!" So I did, so slowly, with my phone in my hand, looking for nearby trees that I could run to, anything I could use for cover, as I was sure that I was the one who was going to be hunted. As I started walking around the truck, though, my phone rang. He ripped me out of my daze. I was at that moment wondering how the hell I had cell phone reception up there. I looked at the screen, and it was one of my friends calling. I answered. Her voice was the most beautiful sound I ever heard. I immediately told her where I was and with who, and she asked me if everything was okay. I told her that if she doesn't hear from me again in the next 30 minutes, then she should call the police. The call began to break up, so I repeated what I said to her again, and to tell the police what I just told her. The call finally cut out, and I looked at Corey. His eyes were shooting daggers at me. He was red in the face, and he looked like he was about to burst an artery in his head. I told him to take me home, turn around, and get back in his truck. So he put the rifle away, got in, and drove like a madman back. For the whole ride, he didn't say a word or make any eye contact. When we arrived at the apartment complex where we lived, he stopped in the street, but didn't turn into the driveway. I jumped out before the truck even came to a complete stop and saw my friend's car parked in my spot since I didn't have a car at the time. She came running towards me as soon as she saw me. We went into my apartment where I explained what had happened. She went wide, and when I told her who the guy was, she told me to pack my bags and to come stay with her and her family. So I did just that. When we got to her house, her dad asked if I was okay. She'd filled them in after the phone call. I explained it all again, and her dad asked me who the guy was. I said his name and gave a description. Her dad got a somber look on his face then and explained that I had been very lucky. He said we should contact the police immediately and give a statement. Also, because he was on probation or parole, unsure of which one, that it was illegal for him to possess a firearm. I called the officer that took my initial statement, then who later came by the house. He was friends with my friend's dad, and I gave another statement. I flew back to my home country a week later. I'd stayed with my friend and her family for that week, as work was just about done and they were having Thanksgiving, etc. Then, the Sunday after the event, her dad and I were making a roast in a barbecue grill in the garage when he filled me in a bit more about Corey. He'd been to school with him, and since then Corey had been a bad seed, dealing drugs, getting into fights, and just being a generally unproductive waste of a human being and a burden to society. His first stint in jail was just after age 18 when he got caught with more than a pound of weed in his possession. He got 3 years for it, as it was his first offense. But the second stint was shortly after he got out. A nature conservation officer caught him hunting illegally. When he confronted him, Corey flipped and beat the officer half to death. That got him 10 years, but his stay was extended. For how long, I'm not sure, because he shanked a couple of inmates and jumped in and assaulted a prison guard. He also told me that the police picked up Corey on Friday night and found him with the loaded rifle in his truck. He was promptly arrested, as it was a violation of his probation. Our interaction took place a few months after he'd gotten out the second time, and her father said there were rumors of him shooting a rival dealer in a city close by, but nothing could be proven. He was also a proud member of the white supremacist. I saw his girlfriend the night before I flew back at the grocery subway. The look she gave me was one of pure hate and anger. I still wonder if she was in on the plan or knew what he was planning to do. I lost contact with my friend and haven't been back there since, and I don't plan to either. I've had enough of redneck neo-Nazis. So Corey, maybe you just wanted to take me on a hunting trip and I overreacted. But with your history of violence, I highly doubt it. If you had premeditated plans to take me out in the forest and hunt me like prey, for that, I hope you rot in prison. Society is a better place without you roaming around freely.
This is something I didn't realize the severity of till I was older. My mom had left me and my brother home alone. It was midday. My brother was 12, maybe 13, so I was 9 years old. Watching him play Xbox in our living room, he had his headset on talking to his friends. There was a knock from the door on our carport. I run and answer the door without looking. It's a grown man I've never seen before. We are separated by the screen door, which at the time was unlocked. He asks, "Are your parents home?" Horror washes over me. First of all, he's knocking from the carport, which is strange in and of itself. A stranger would knock on our front door, right? And our carport is empty. We only had one car and my mother had taken it. This man knows that my parents aren't home. I'm afraid. I don't know why, but I am scared. Immediately, my brother in the other room comes to mind. I've never had a father figure. My brother has always been the one who has made me feel safe. The strongest person in the whole world. Someone who could protect me in any situation. How most people would regard their father, I think. I feel as though I can barely speak. Wide-eyed, I manage to stutter out, "No, but, big brother here." Without even a moment's pause, this man reaches for the screen door and starts to open it. Like an act of God, divine intervention, an arm reaches out from behind me over my shoulder and grabs the door. My brother pushes past me, holding the door, forcing the man back with his presence, out into the carport, and closes the door behind him. The man tells my brother he was looking to buy some old swing set that was in our front yard at the time. My brother comes back in without saying anything to me, puts on his headset and continues playing. I sit down as well and continue watching him. I don't believe we ever told our mom. Luckily, I never encountered this person again, and it pretty much fades from my memory. But as I got older, it became one of the scariest things that ever happened to me.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
I am now a 72-year-old man. This happened long ago, but I remember it so well. The background was a series of events that placed me in a mountain cabin outside of Frederick, Maryland, circa 1969 or 1970. Just say my life at the time was in disarray. I had dropped out of college, my father had died very badly, and I was alienated. I needed to get my mind right. The opportunity to move to an isolated cabin, to live in contemplation and solitude was welcome. I had some inheritance money to pay for it. To the best of my memory, I was there 8 to 9 months. No TV, but books and radio. I had a library card, and I can't remember if I even had a phone. The story begins when, a month into my stay, a female beagle showed up at my door. She was a lost dog, and I took her in. Never could train her to do anything, but I fed her, and she was a sweet, if not the brightest, dog. A few months in, I began to feel a presence around the isolated cabin. Hard to describe, but I felt like someone was watching. On many occasions, I thought someone might even be looking into my cabin window, watching us. The next phase was the shadowing or following. I knew the folks a half-mile down the lane, woods all around, and would sometimes visit them at night. Something was waiting for me, and followed closely in the woods beside me in the darkness. You could hear it easily, footsteps in the woods, and it picked up its pace as I did. This not only happened to me, but to my younger brother who visited, and to friends, and it spooked them big time. At night, it was out there around the cabin. And here's the funny thing. I was never afraid, never felt threatened. Not at all, at least early on. There was no feeling of malevolence. I spent a good bit of time wandering the vast areas of woodlands around me. There was a state park just up the hill, and the Frederick Municipal Forest went on for mile after mile. The whole of western Maryland was much more country than it is now. None of the development had set in yet. In our hikes, the dog and we came across evidence of campsites, recent ones in the woods, traces of fires, old abandoned buildings that had corners that gave shelter and looked slept in, garbage, food and drink, paper, what have you. Perhaps hunters, but much of it did not have the organized feel that you would get from experienced hunters. The last month of my stay there was when things intensified. Maybe he sensed I was preparing to leave. In the mornings, I would find small dead animals at the bottom of the front porch steps. The cabin had a small front porch screen with a light door and 4 wooden steps to the ground. A spotlight would illuminate the long front yard with woods close by either side. Dead animals began to appear at the bottom of the steps many mornings. I remember small birds, then a squirrel, a rabbit, even a weasel one day, like they were offerings. I had to grab them up before the dog ate them, and this went on almost daily for several weeks. One night, very late, I was awoken by some sound. I lay in bed and heard something from the front porch. I hopped up and hit the lights, and I saw that hound dog who never learned to sit or stay, standing at the front door in a perfect pointer position. She was shaking in fear. She never barked. I heard the door slam and footsteps down the steps. I hit the spotlight but saw nothing. I went out. He had been on the porch at my front door, maybe trying to enter. After that, I stayed in at night more and more. The animal offerings got bigger and bigger. Larger birds, a possum, a woodchuck. It really wasn't funny. The final 2 gifts were legs, either from horses or even cows. Big and bloody. One was skinned, dear God. And the second to last day, the dog left me. I could hear her in the woods howling on a trail following a scent. I looked for her in every way I could. Came up in the following weeks, but to no avail. She left as she came. I moved back to Maryland's suburbs of D.C., got an apartment with a friend, got a job and moved on with my life. One day not long after, I picked up the Washington Post and there was an article about recent encounters with the Sykesville monster. It's described as a tall, yeti-like creature, fur-covered, on 2 legs that would pick out a family or person and give them attention. I wasn't the only one. That attention, described in the article, was exactly what had happened to me. Following you at night, looking inside the house, gifts, and so on. I was shocked. If I had turned on that spotlight and seen a Bigfoot or Yeti, I might still be running. But I think I know who it was. Sykesville, Maryland was the location of the Springfield Hospital Center, a large state psychiatric hospital. It was 20 miles or so east of Frederick, and back then, many folks knew how to live in the woods. They grew up that way, country folks. I think the monster was actually an escaped patient, or just a free schizophrenic who lived outside. This is like all the homeless you see in the cities now, probably off his meds, but somehow functional and just lonely. He would pick people or families to adopt, so to speak. The camps in the woods could have been him. Nothing to do, he would make mischief. I think he liked me, but sensed that I was leaving. Now, I can't prove any of this, it's just my theory. My monster was very much of that time and place, and his behavior was what I noticed in nearly every case then. I don't think he could have survived until the 1980s. Deinstitutionalization of mental hospitals threw the mentally ill out into the streets and took away the shelter of hospitals. Unprotected, the mentally ill do die, but once in a while, they find their way to you. This happened a few years ago, but I still think about it to this day. I was on holiday in a city on the other side of the country celebrating my 21st birthday with my best friend. We were having an amazing night out with a few too many drinks and ended up meeting two guys, Andrew and Billy. They seemed like really cool guys and we were into them, so when they asked us back to their hotel room, we said yes. Obviously a silly idea, but we were young and drunk. Things were great on the way back to the hotel room. We were all laughing and having a great time. When we got to the hotel room, there were two other men there as well, Ricky and JD, who were at least 10 to 15 years older than us. They gave us creepy vibes, but we brushed it off. We asked Andrew and Billy who these guys were, and they said that they were colleagues as they were in the city for work and the company paid for their rooms. So Andrew and Billy were in different rooms, but we were all partying in Andrew's room that he shared with Ricky. I got a little too drunk and my friend put me to bed. She said that she was going to Billy's room and asked if I would be okay with Andrew, and I said yes. Keep in mind, my friend didn't have a phone either, so we basically had no way of getting in contact with each other. Another stupid thing I know. So I'd been in the bed for a while with Andrew just talking and chilling when he says, "I just have to pop out, I'll be right back." I assumed he meant just out to the bathroom, not out of the actual hotel room, but he left the hotel room to get something from Billy's hotel room. Anyway, I was just watching TV in bed when the bedroom door opens and I assumed it was Andrew, but my heart sank when it was Ricky, the weird colleague. He walked into the room and sat on the bed. Keep in mind, I'm very naked at this point, trying to cover myself with a blanket. He said, "You do realize that everyone has left you alone in here, right? It's just you all alone. No one is here, and no one can hear you." And continued edging closer and closer to me on the bed. At this point, I was completely speechless and absolutely terrified. I was completely frozen in fear, and I had no idea what to do. I tried to say something, but nothing came out. He definitely sensed my fear, and for some reason, he just got up and left. A sense of relief flooded me, and I felt silly for overreacting. That wasn't until I heard JD, the other random colleague, shouting, "Get the F back in here, what are you doing? This isn't what we discussed. Get back in there and do what you were meant to do. Who cares what that girl thinks, just get back in there and do what you need to do." I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in because I was so scared, but there was no way out, and the only way out of the hotel room was through the front door, and I had to walk past Ricky and JD to get there. I was just so terrified I had a million thoughts rushing through my head, and I had no idea what to do, but I knew that I had to escape. I decided my only option was just to leave the room and be ready to defend myself if things were to go pear-shaped. I threw my clothes on and grabbed my shoes. I opened the door and Ricky and JD were sitting on a couch close to the bedroom door. JD said, "Hey sexy, where are you going in such a rush? Come on and join us, come here right now." I said no thanks and ran to the front door and ripped it open. When I got out, I was so relieved, but I was still in a random hotel in a random city with no way to contact my friend. But I thought my best option was to go to the lobby and just wait. As I was walking, I heard two men yelling down the hallway, "Where are you? We know you aren't too far away. Come back and join us. You know you want to." It was Ricky and JD. I was absolutely terrified by this point. I began sprinting to the elevator. I could hear them gaining on me. I never knew I could run so fast, but I just continued and didn't look back. I felt like I was running forever until I reached the end of the corridor and my worst nightmare had come true. I missed the turnoff of the elevator. So I had to turn and run back towards where I could hear Ricky and JD still yelling down the hall. I found the elevator and got in. I could hear their voices getting louder and louder, and I didn't want to imagine what would happen if they got into the elevator with me. The door finally closed after what felt like a lifetime. I thought I would go down to the lobby and just wait there because at least there would be people there, so there would be some form of safety. I got to the lobby and realized that there was no one in sight. No one at all, not even behind the desk. I sat there on the couch and didn't know what to do with myself. I was absolutely terrified that Ricky and JD would come to the lobby. And then I heard the elevator ding and the door open. My heart dropped, but it was Andrew. I told him what had happened, and he was outraged that his colleagues did that, and he took me to where my best friend was. Everything turned out to be fine, but it truly could have been a lot worse.
I live here in New Zealand, and late in 2018, I was feeling sort of lonely, so I decided to download the dating app Tinder to try and find myself a nice guy to go on a few dates with. Maybe even find myself a long-term boyfriend out of it. I ended up matching with this guy who'd come over from Australia, and we chatted for 2 weeks before we finally met up. The conversation was quite light, nothing too heavy, and it was fun. Like I said, it was from Australia. So we talked about Aussie things, and I remember telling him how much I wanted to visit Melbourne. He said that he'd been there once or twice and started making recommendations for some great coffee shops that he knew of. He seemed like a nice, normal guy, and when we agreed to meet, I was happy to do that. But then maybe 5 days or so before we were due to meet, he got really persistent and impatient. He would text me multiple times in a day, and if I didn't reply straight away, he would ask if something was wrong. I thought it was weird that he was being so clingy after starting off so confident. He kept trying to bring the date forward, so we could meet up sooner and would totally forget. If I had told him I was busy on a particular day, almost like he wasn't paying attention or didn't care about what I had to say. It was honestly really unusual for someone to be that persistent with me. I'd had guys before who were maybe a bit persistent, but only have a nervous excitement. Different kind of excitement than this awesome guy seemed to be. I just couldn't understand why it was that he could not possibly wait until the Sunday that we'd arranged to meet. It felt very narcissistic, and I should have seen it as the red flag that it was and not just meet up with him at all. I had the messages saved on my phone for a while, so I had a record of the exact dates and times that he sent some of the messages. So on the 2nd of December, he messaged me just after 9 a.m. saying, "Good morning, how are you?" And again about an hour and a half later. I didn't reply to the first message because I was asleep, but I think he took it the wrong way because he said it was fine if I changed my mind and didn't feel like going on the date. That was when I messaged him back and confirmed that I would meet him later on that day. We met up and went to a place called Revelry. It's a very standard bar, very popular, and lots of people go there, but it's definitely more of a nighttime bar. I had never drunk there during the afternoon or the daytime, but it was open. Seemed like it had a chill atmosphere, and he wanted to go there, so that's where we went. He was a bit bigger than the pictures on his Tinder profile showed, and it was obvious that he had put on a little bit of weight. He had big distinctive eyes, and he was very, very clean cut. I mean, like his clothes looked freshly washed and ironed. He was also very well groomed, obviously took good care of his skin and stuff like that. Like he was really good looking. I remember asking him a lot of different questions, and he just sort of talked to me. He tried to ask me a few questions, but they weren't very in-depth ones. I thought he was a bit nervous, to be honest, but that's not unusual for a first date. But things start to sort of unravel at one point, because he had said one thing in messages about where he worked and a different thing on the date. I started to feel a bit uneasy, like I wanted to trust him, but as soon as he started to put on some inconsistencies, I began to wonder if he was just lying about stuff to impress me, because he was from Australia. I asked him the whereabouts that he had met his Kiwi friends, and he told me that all his friends were police officers or somehow involved in law enforcement. He said how he had met with them while out drinking in various bars, how they gotten to know each other over time, and they regularly invite him back to their places over barbecues and stuff like that. He also mentioned that his best friend from Australia was coming over to be a Crown Court prosecutor. That's why I noticed that a lot of the stuff that he was talking about kind of had this running theme to it. It kind of seemed like he was obsessed with that sort of thing, which in hindsight explains an awful lot. I think he was sort of trying to process some of the things that he had been up to over the previous few days, and it came out in his conversation style. He obviously thought an awful lot about policemen, dead bodies, and ways people can be killed, prosecution justice in the court system, and it just came out in a very strange way like that on our first date. Like I said before, we talked quite a lot about him being friends with lots of different policemen, and he went into quite a bit of depth regarding the details of certain investigations that they apparently shared with him. He said that we're having a really tough time around the time because of bodies going missing in the White Toggy Ranges. He told me that police corpse sniffing dogs can only detect decaying flesh about 4 feet deep under the soil, so if the bodies are buried in a deeper than that, the police won't be able to find them. I thought it was a bit of a morbid thing to talk about on the first date, but it was an interesting fact nonetheless. He also got into a conversation about all the different kinds of poisonous snakes in Australia, and he became quite animated about it. He obviously had a passion for the natural world. It was quite out there, but I thought it was cute. I love animals too, so I was glad we had something in common and made me feel a bit more relaxed again. But then, right as I started feeling comfortable with him again, he started telling me this really bizarre and creepy story. He told me how crazy it is that a guy can make one little mistake and then go to jail for the rest of his life for it. He went on to tell me about this guy he knew back in Oz who had consensual intimacy involving choking with his girlfriend, then that ended up accidentally killing her in the process. He assured me that the whole thing was a horrible, tragic accident, how things just went wrong suddenly, and how the guy was really upset because he loved her and would never hurt her on purpose. But still, the guy got done for manslaughter and was sent to prison for a long, long time. What I know now is this could have been him testing on his story on me when he was able to see that I was a bit uncomfortable with what he was saying. He tried to change the subject, so we could talk about more mundane things. I didn't try to make a swift exit or anything. I'm quite used to dealing with all sorts of people. And I'm not saying people who talk about dark things on the first date are like bad people or anything, but it was definitely weird. We hung out for a while, but after about 3 hours or so, I made some excuses as to why I had to leave, and we said goodbye. As we were parting ways, he said, "My car is this way," and pointed off down a particular road. My car was down the same road. But at that stage, I was feeling uneasy and my instincts had just kicked in telling me to walk a different way. He was also a lot bigger than me, so if something went wrong, I knew I wouldn't be able to defend myself. In hindsight, it was a good decision. It was my intuition sense. My brain was saying this was strange. That was strange. And looking back on it now, it is really strange to think of who he actually was. I don't think it is the realm of what normal human brains can comprehend. But just the day before we met up, the guy was out on that first date with had murdered a girl in his hotel room, a British girl called Grace MacLeod. The reason he had brought up his friend accidentally strangling his girlfriend is because that's exactly how he'd killed her. Although whether or not he was on purpose is another question entirely. Also, the reason he had mentioned the whole Toggery mountain range is because that's where he ended up disposing of her body. And all that other stuff about sniffer dogs was research that he'd been doing the previous night that was still sort of consuming his mind. It is hard to look back and think that that had just happened to her. From what I understand, while we were on our date, her body was still in that hotel room of his, hidden under the bed or something, wrapped in a blanket. There's nothing I could have done, and I know that now, but it is still really hard to come to terms with that. I do think if it had been a date in the evening, potentially, I could have been a victim. I take a lot of solace in the fact that I do have my wits about me and do take safety in online dating quite seriously, and that is nothing against any women who are willing to go home with someone on the first date. But I do want to say to young women who take one more step in your thinking when you're on a date to see how well you know this person actually. Since then, I have been on dates with lovely, trustworthy men, But think, how well do I really know them? It has made me go a little slower and divulge a little less personal information to them. I know in modern dating, it is quite common to give people your Instagram handle, but you aren't giving people access to a lot of personal information. It is really dangerous. And I just want to encourage people to take a step back and think before they do that. There's nothing wrong with taking a step back, taking it slow and pacing yourself a bit. Alcohol has a big effect. It is part of the social fabric of dating and part of life these days, but it still comes with a massive risk. Women need to be really aware of how much they are drinking on dates, and unfortunately, drinks are sometimes spiked. We live in this world where people are still idealistic about how things should be on dates, but incidents like these take things back 10 or 20 years, or women are still having to grip their keys between their fingers, or can't leave a drink on the table. We aren't as developed as we think we are in areas such as dating. Technology has gotten ahead of us. I think people are as they always are. I think with the advancement of technology, we thought we would become more refined, but we are just the same, but with new technology. I think the invention of dating apps is a wonderful thing, and I wouldn't want to live in a world without that. But I just wished for a world where women don't have to think about their safety all the time.